Hey, Amber.
Yes, I'm almost there. Sorry, I'm struggling with all the different Zoom screens and looking for where it is. I've got it now.
No, it's all good. What are you looking for?
Just the screen with the link. So I now
I
have,
just sent it out. Don't worry about it. I'll show you how to do it tomorrow.
it's just the attendee invitation, right?
No, it's not the attendee, it's the panelist.
Okay, where?
I'll show you tomorrow. Don't worry, I just did it.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay.
Um, just so you know, I started scanning the appendix to the 1984 LWRP,
Mm-hmm.
and I found the legislation for flood management. They did it in 1977, and they did it in another year, I think 1984. And I found the legislation for, well, I don't know if you know, but SECRA, New York State adopted SECRA in 1977, I think it was.
Okay.
And the Village of Mamaroneck adopted SECRA based on the state SECRA law in 1977, and I found that legislation.
Okay.
So again, I say this again, anytime you find old legislation,
Yeah.
scan it, save it, and put it in the drawer so we don't have to go digging for it. We always have it.
Okay.
So that's what I was doing. I'm scanning the appendix. You just never know what you'll find.
Okay.
How you doing otherwise?
Good.
All right, I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. be able to do it now.
Over, okay. All right, that's the first time this has worked for a while. Sure. Okay. All right, thank you.
It's all set.
We're recording. And at this time, I'll move to open the meeting. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, folks. This is our November 18, 2020 meeting of Harbor and Coastal Zone Management Commission. We don't need to point out the exits. We are still operating entirely remotely. I appreciate anybody who's gotten on, who's watching on LMC TV or on the YouTube feed or has joined the Zoom, because public participation is a good thing, even when you disagree with us or are frustrated with us. So we've got one applicant item and then several discussion items. Let's just get right to the applicant. We'll call 1165 Grecian.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good to see you all again. Hope you're all doing well and staying safe.
Evening, Counselor. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Ms. Motel is counsel, lead counsel for this. She had a conflict this evening, and I'm here in her stead this evening.
Well, we're very familiar with you, and I think it's probably safe to say that you'll do a more than capable job filling in for Ms. Motel and representing your client as you always do.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm also joined this evening by Rich Cordone from JMC. William, if he can be elevated to a panelist as well. And I'm also joined by the applicants, Bill and Elizabeth Fedina, who are here this evening as well. And we look forward to presenting the supplemental submission that we provided to you recently on November 4th.
Okay, before you start, there's two things that I think you may just be able to sort of hit as you go through, and then we may have a sort of longer discussion about some of the big ticket items that everybody's expecting. But as I went through the revised submission and sort of thought about the issues, I want to sensitize you to two things. One, the last SWIP update I saw was 10/1 of this year, and that's before the changes. So if as you go through the changes to the proposal, if you could address anything that would affect about the stormwater plan, that'd be appreciated. There are people in this village who pay a lot of attention to these things. I actually got citizen viewer correspondence saying, hey, there's no updated SWIP, and that's true. So I'm sure you can explain to me whether it needs to and can be updated, or there's nothing much that changes about it. The other thing, when we touched on the trees, we spent a lot of time in a prior session talking about trees, tree cutting, the anchor trees, and the if you're familiar with the terminology of environmental services, the environmental services that the big anchor trees provided in maintaining a canopy and its effect on the wildlife. And we primarily touched on policy 77A44, right? We didn't talk much about the role of the trees in erosion. And as I went through this, I started to be concerned that we had not closed the loop on the role of the smaller trees that were cut in erosion and what that means for our policies 11 and 12, especially 12, and making sure that we're not allowing work that's already gone on there to create an erosion condition, and whether we need to do something to address that in order to have the record that we would need to on that issue. With that, and of course, we've discussed a bunch of other things, which I'm sure will come up. With that, I just let you talk, and then we'll see what questions we have or comments the commissioners want to make.
Great. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the heads up on the issues that you'd like us to address. To the extent that we can address them tonight, we'll certainly look to provide in a supplemental submission. Notwithstanding, we do have a PowerPoint presentation that we would like to walk you through. We think that will be helpful and systematic way of identifying the changes to the proposal. As you've seen in the review of the materials, the proposal has been modified, we believe modified significantly, and taking into account a number of the items that have been discussed in prior meetings, suggestions and concerns that have been raised by the commission. So with that, Rich, you're going to be, so if Mr. William, if Rich Cordone can share.
It's fine.
his
It's
screen.
connected. He can do it. He can do it.
Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill Fedina, one of the owners of the premises, who will be able to walk you through the PowerPoint presentation.
Did I lose audio?
No, I don't think there's any audio right now, Doreen.
Oh, okay, good. Because I heard a
Good.
big bang.
Good evening, Commissioners. Can you hear me speaking?
Yes,
is,
yes, we
Yes.
can. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, and good evening again. Thank you for the heads up. Rich Cordone, I'm going to give it just kind of as I did in the September meeting. It's only a few pages, a short overview of especially the site plan changes. And then thank you for the heads up. Rich Cordone will touch on the changes to the SWIFT right after that. So the first page, like last time, we just wanted to show you again, kind of the recap of our last meeting in September, what some of the main action items were following that meeting. It was, again, clearly show everything, site plan of the existing versus the proposed home. And we obviously made some substantial site plan changes. We'll go into that next. Please provide an update on the impervious and fill. Another one was raised, sort of where do you stand with all parties? So we obviously resubmit a site plan and have further updates there. We'll go through it. It came up about sewer on the September meeting. You said, please provide anything that you've done to the village engineer to help them prepare a memo, number 5. And number 6 actually came up, I believe, on the October working group call, investigate the 12-inch drainage pipe on the property line. So these were the, again, I'm sure we can talk about a number of things, but these were the main takeaways for September. So just wanted to, everything that we have on the following pages is just a summary of all of the items posted on Novus and submitted to the village. But again, this is more of a starting summary. So you can sort of see how seriously we're taking everything. So the first one, modifications to the site plan. So the next 2 slides will actually show the site plans if that's easier, but I just wanted to start with a bullet point list of exactly how we went through the thought process to do it, as well as what we actually did. So this step 1, in terms of the impervious surface, we wanted to make sure there was no increase in impervious in the wetland buffer compared to the existing site plan. The second one was, of course, the concept of fill, how it is throughout the site and the buffer. So yes, because of the septic, we still have applied for a variance from the planning board for any fill on the site. But as a side note, there is no proposed fill in the wetland buffer. Again, I know that's only part of it, but that's another thing that we made. The big change to enable this was really for the following bullet points of reconfiguring the garage, changing the driveway, making it a 3-car to 2-car, detaching it from the house, and moving it much closer to the road. The following slides with the site plan will illustrate this very clearly, but that, again, we looked at a number of configurations, but this was effectively the biggest one that we could to try to achieve consistency with the LWRP objectives. And so this shows it, hopefully a picture, makes it a lot easier to see, but the September site plan, versus the November submitted site plan. The house basically moved a couple feet. You can move 3 feet to the left, basically, and down a touch. But really the big move, the breezeway, the walkway, the covered walkway between the garage and the house, the garage, the 3-car plus garage, obviously the driveway itself moved to a 2-car garage, kind of as close to the street as you could do, for basically having a 13-foot entrance to your garage and down to the actual elevation of the road, with the engineering best practices sort of angle of descent. So that basically, we moved it as far as you could one way and as far as the other, and kind of tried to make sure there was no impervious in the wetland buffer. So that, hopefully everyone can see that clearly. Then the next slide even shows it more blown up. And so we'll get to that in a second. But this is obviously what we were looking to do. So again, this is a little clearer, and the difference on this one, it shows the existing house. And so the other impact of making this change was the new house, the proposed house, is further from the wetland buffer. If you recall, the garage and driveway were a lot closer to that orange line. So we thought about that as well. We are moving away from and disturbing less of the wetland buffer, obviously nothing in the wetland proper. You can see that. And then, of course, the driveway itself, you can sort of see where it was in green, dotted green in the wetland buffer. Of course, the new driveway is 100% out of the wetland buffer. So again, happy to go through other things. And that big dotted green line is the 10-foot contour line.
Which is the New York State DEC jurisdictional wetland boundary, correct?
Yes, yes, Doreen, that was confirmed on June 30th. That's actually on one of the next slides, absolutely. And so this, again, showing a picture of it, because this was what we submitted back to the DEC. They said, how does it compare to the building neighborhood? So that's all of my immediate neighbors. That's the square footage that's publicly shown on the Mamaroneck website, and with square footage and the amount of beds that are publicly shown. Obviously, you can also see all but 2 houses, myself and the neighbor just to the left. They all have pools, we don't. You can see the distance, obviously, to the water. So just, again, it's just another metric we were thinking of when we were looking to reconfigure the design and the site plan. And so, again, hopefully everyone can see that one clearly. And then if you like, if we could go to the next page, we talk about fill impervious, et cetera. So the fill, so basically we have no fill around any area of the house or the garage, with the exception of the front of the garage for the driveway and the front of the house because of the septic. So there is now 0 fill anywhere around the foundations, which means there's 0 sort of fill relating to the 2 main buildings in the wetland buffer. So there's none there. You can obviously see the net fill impact from September to November by making this change. And so, yeah, that, again, just there's a lot more details on the site plans. This is, of course, the primary number that we were looking to minimize. Same with impervious. This was maybe obvious looking at the site plan side by side with moving the garage and no driveway, but you can basically see how the impervious on the proposed total is the same. Obviously, how it breaks down line by line. The driveway is obviously a meaningful part that went to 0, and the rest are generally similar, but you can, hopefully that's clear enough, and also on the engineering design plans, just to again show what we were doing. And Doreen, on your point, so this is the status update of the main, let's say, reviewers plus DEC. DEC, that's the very abbreviated timeline of, yes, on June 30th, the contour line, July 1st, we applied. 3.25 months later, we got the notice of incomplete application, responded to it a week later. November 4th said they have everything you need. Last Friday, they said we were complete and will issue a permit this week. And that actually came this morning from the DEC. And so another thing on the DEC permit, we actually, when we got it, because Kristen and then Tony on our pre-call on Monday, we're like, well, normally there's a 15-day notice period. So when the paint permit came, we emailed back the DEC, say, do we need to do the noticing? They said, because it's a minor change, no, you do not. And we obviously, we have that email. You can independently verify it, but just as a side note, that also came up today. So wanted to mention that as well. And as you can see, the next one's village engineer, Mamaroneck building inspector, Department of Health. Brian, thank you. Got comments, late yesterday afternoon. We reviewed them. I think there's 3, and for all intents and purposes, any change you recommend we can make. I think there's one other suggestion we're happy to review. I think hopefully you'll find all are very surmountable, and we're very happy to accommodate. Building inspector, there are a number of conversations, hopefully this week. They tried last night. They said maybe at the end of the week. Same with Department of Health. So obviously with any comments, we'll hopefully receive them this week and be able to address them shortly after. And of course, we'll provide those responses. As and when we have them. So I think at this point, this sort of is the recap of everything we've changed in the status. Happy to talk through any of this. Of course, we can talk anything related to the sewer, the rest of the site, or however you like to proceed, but maybe I'll just pause there and we can have Tony, Rich, we can talk about the SWIFT changes if you like, maybe right now to address that head on, and then take any way you like. But thank you again for your time.
Actually, while we're on this slide, I think it's best to discuss the SWIFT. As you notice, you see the date on the SWIFT is October 1st. The reason that the date's October 1st is because we were responding to that in response to the DEC's comments. So that got resubmitted to the DEC with regard to their comments, and it hasn't been revised since that. As you might understand, the plans that are before you guys today were submitted to the DEC in October.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand you for the record. The SWIP dated October of this year incorporates all the changes that we're seeing before us as of 11/9.
That's correct, and that was reviewed by the village's consulting engineer as well.
Okay,
So,
thank you for checking that box.
and then with regards, all right. Is there any other question? Is there any other things that the commissioners would like to speak about?
Yes, I had a few questions on.
You know what, Doreen, if I could, because I sort of have an idea well, you know what? Go ahead and do your stuff, because I'm sure you have your list in front of you. Let's get it done.
Well,
Go
the
ahead,
plan
Doreen.
has changed. We do have incomplete information, but there's a couple of things I wanted to clarify. On the newly submitted plan, sheet 3C300, I don't know if someone can pull that up.
Yes, I'll pull that up momentarily. Can you see it?
Not
No,
yet.
I'm sorry. Sorry. Yeah. I have to reshare. Okay.
All right, that's great. Since this is a plan that I can't, no, perfect, that I can't really measure, what is the distance from the jurisdictional line, the 10-foot contour, to, in feet, from the septic tank, the actual tank, to the wetland boundary line that DEC is jurisdictional on?
Hold on a second, I'll tell you that. It's about 34 feet.
So where you just put the 1.71 inch,
Mhm.
if you went horizontal to where that is? Is it closer? Wow, this is amazing.
Okay, so 1.52. So that's 30 feet.
That's 30 to 34 feet. And what's the distance in feet from the DEC jurisdictional wetland to the distribution box?
The closest is 53 feet.
My other question on this is have you submitted this plan to the Westchester County Health Department,
Yes,
the septic?
yes,
And it includes the green line as a delineation? Because
Yes.
what you've submitted in the separation distances from wastewater sources, you gave us a chart, and then your former plan, the former house plan, but it didn't have the DEC jurisdictional line, and I don't know that that's marked on this plan. And according to what you gave us that they talk about, the septic has to be 50 feet, and it's only 30 to 34 feet from the,
those are
Jurisdiction.
setbacks from the wetland itself, not the boundaries, not the buffers.
it doesn't specify that on this. New York State DEC wetland.
It doesn't specify that on what? I'm sorry.
On the report from the Westchester County Rules and Regulations, design and construction of residential septic systems and drilled wells.
Those dimensions are from the wetland itself, not from the buffer.
I'm just looking at what I see in front of me. It says New York State DEC wetland, the 10-foot contour is the jurisdictional area.
Yes, that's the edge of their jurisdiction. That's not the limits of the wetland. The wetland is what was flagged in the back of the property and indicated by the orange line.
Actually, that's the freshwater wetland, because there are two on this property.
The f- for-
That's what was determined as hydric soils wetland by your wetlands person. So the gray line is the wetland buffer for the freshwater wetlands. The New York State DEC jurisdictional line is a 10-foot contour for wetlands.
The DEC's approved this plan. The DEC's looked at this plan and the health departments looked at this plan, and neither of them have brought that, has had any concern with that dimension that you're stating. They don't read the code the same way. They're not reading it the same way that you are.
So you have something from the county health department that says that, correct?
It's expected this week. We're working with the health department to get the permit.
My other question is on the R tank for the stormwater.
Yes, ma'am.
There has to be a water quality component to that. What are the items that this particular system deals with as far as water quality treatment?
The water quality treatment is going to be handled through the rest of our stormwater system. It's not actually handled through the R tanks. The R tanks are a detention system. We're handling the stormwater quality through the rainwater harvesting tank, and we're also getting it through sumps in the inlets. Once again, this has been reviewed by the village's consulting engineer, and I don't believe that he has any comments with regards to water quality. I think he's fairly satisfied with that.
Well, what I'm asking is what does it treat? What chemicals? What impediments to water quality does your system treat?
It treats the silt and the sediment that's going to be any runoff that's on the driveway.
What about your roof leaders?
That's being collected, yes.
So there are metals and all kinds of things that run off from the roofs of the homes. So is there an oil and grease and metal component to how this is doing water quality treatment?
This, with all due respect, the village's consulting engineers reviewed the plan. They've determined that it's in compliance with the village's stormwater management regulations as well as the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation.
So is this a DEC approved stormwater
It doesn't have to
management?
be. The stormwater design was conducted in accordance with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Stormwater Design Manual.
That's what I'm saying. They have approved water quality and treatment systems. Is this particular one? This is a new one for me. That's why I'm asking. And I'd like to ask our village engineer.
Good
Sure.
time to talk to
Yeah,
Brian.
The rainwater harvesting, I mean, as part of the runoff reduction, part of the new stormwater or updated stormwater manual is certainly a used practice. It's a standard, typical residential driveway and roof. There's no real pollutant of concern that would require any kind of mechanical filter, or any other kind of treatment mechanism to meet the DEC water quality standards. They provided their water quality volume in the harvesting, and also I believe there's some rain gardens on site. So throughout, through a combination of smaller practices, they meet the runoff reduction and the water quality parts of the manual. So I have no concerns about shingle chemicals or driveway. There are sumps in the catch basins. This is very typical.
Understood, but there's a memo that was put out by the DEC about what roof water contains. But my question is this a practice that is DEC approved? Not the system and not how it's done, but this R tank. Is this a particular practice that the DEC has on its approved list?
It's not a R-Tank. They're not taking credit as a proprietary practice. The R-Tank is just detention. It could be a solid pipe system. It could be a concrete chamber. It doesn't matter what product. This happens to be an R-Tank. They're not taking credit for any runoff reduction or water quality treatment in the R-Tank. So it's not applicable. It just happens to be the practice the engineer selected for this application.
Understood, but you're still not understanding my question. Is it a practice on the DEC's list of approved practices? What he's utilizing, the rainwater harvesting system?
Oh, that's different. That's not the harvesting system. Yes, that is a chapter in chapter 5 of the manual as part of the water quality runoff reduction part. Yes.
So is there a zero net increase of stormwater for our policy that is going to, I guess, emit from that pipe and drainage system where it says N section? Is that where the overflow is going?
Yes.
And how long does that water get released from that system?
I believe it's a gradual discharge that's metered by the outlet control structure. But Rich might be able to talk about the numbers.
Absolutely. If you look in that outlet control structure, we have a 4-inch orifice. And what that does is that'll slowly discharge the water that's been accumulated in the detention system over a period of, I believe it is 12 hours or so. I have to look into the minutia of the stormwater pollution prevention plan that we prepared, but I don't have that number off the top of my head.
So what happens in the 100-year storm?
In the 100-year storm, the water comes into the detention system. We can store a good bit of it, and any excessive flow would go out through the outlet control structure over the weir and it would be discharged into a smaller area. If you look here on the site plan, what we've done is we've created a bit of a depression to use as a rain garden. And what that would do is that would allow the water a bit more of a spot to set as opposed to just sheet flowing across the backyard.
And I noticed that that's contour 7, you're creating a depression there, so won't it flow to, I guess that's 9 or 6 upside down? That's eventually going to flow towards the harbor, correct? Or Delancey Cove?
Correct. That's where it flows today.
So what about the 500-year storm? I'm only kidding. I just wonder at what storm level will your system be able to hold water and not automatically release it? Is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah. Yes, it's designed for the 25-year storm as indicated in the village's stormwater design code.
Right. So that's why I asked about the 100-year storm. So it's just going to get contained in the system and then released. How is the water treated in the 100-year storm for water quality?
The water is going to be some of the water is going to be treated because what you have to understand is the 100-year storm is over a period of 24 hours. It has ebbs and flows. It's not all the water flowing down at a constant rate at once. So what's going to happen depending upon how hard that flow is at any given time, it's going to either be taken into the system and go out through the flowed out slowly through the orifice, or it's going to overtop and come out through the weir. And the same thing, basically the site is going to be modeled. It's going to handle the 100-year storm the same way it does today as it would after development, post-development. There's still going to be a runoff reduction volume. It's going to be a better condition in post-construction than pre-construction.
We always hear that, but what's the rainfall on the 100-year storm? Because I think the 25-year storm is 6-point-something inches of rain.
Yeah,
is what I.
The 100-year storm, I'd have to look that up. I don't have that in my back pocket right now.
I know it's over 8. So I know it was years ago in 2007. It was like 8 inches of rain, but the capacity of that is how many gallons?
Oh, we have.
5,000?
Probably about that. We have a 5,000-gallon rainwater harvesting tank, and then we have our tank is probably going to be about 10 to 15,000 gallons.
Okay. End of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm gonna roll through the commissioners who, aside from me and Andrew, because I think I know what Andrew wants to talk about, and I know what I have left to talk about. So, David, you're muted. It would help if you were unmuted.
It would help. Okay. Now I see the changes that have been made. What did they address the pipe? I didn't hear anything on that.
What we've done is we had a camera inspection contractor go out there and try to investigate the pipe. Unfortunately, it was deteriorated. It was plugged. It was unable to determine its location. We can't for sure say whether or not it originates on an applicant's property or on the neighboring property, since it is right on the property line right there. However, we are not proposing to use it or touch anything or have anything to do with it. So any further investigation of this would require an excavation, and we don't feel it would be worthwhile. It would be more of a disturbance than it would be worth.
And we've included a drain pipe investigation report in Exhibit G of our last submission, and that drain pipe investigation report is dated November 3rd.
You're saying that pipe is not utilized now? There's no water?
That's correct. It was collapsed and it was filled with silt. We cannot identify its location, but we can tell you with utmost of certainty that it is not being used, and it has not been used in quite a while.
And you're saying, isn't it on your property line though? Because
It's on the property line. It's right on the property line. If you look right here on the corner, it's actually partly on the neighboring property.
but it's open. You can see it where it goes in, right? It's not a,
Yes, there's a number of broken pieces of pipe that are there. It's actually underwater most of the time. We had to go out there twice because we had to, the first time we went out there, it was high tide and it was fully submerged under 4 feet of water. And we had to go out in low tide. And in low tide, the pipe was, it
we
was.
talking about the same pipe? Because I went out there, I photographed it. I mean, I went out there. It ends right there. It's very visible. I mean,
Yes, I understand, sir. And when
go
we
on the
went out there and we camera inspected it and put a camera inside it, it was blocked at the property line. If you
So
can see the screen, it's the 12-inch pipe exposed in the water. Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, but that pipe continues and goes onto your property, correct?
We can't ascertain that. We were not able to snake more than 2 to 3 feet into the pipe past the broken joints.
Did you ask the adjacent property owner about it?
We did not ask the adjacent property owner about it.
Well, for what it's worth, my only comment then is, it's sort of strange to say we're doing all this work on the property and, oh, there's a pipe there, we don't want to go look at it, or we're not going to dig it up to look at it. It's right
So
there.
we did look at it. We did look at it. We're not proposing to use it as a discharge point. It doesn't make sense for us to excavate this pipe and trace it out in the wetland proper area when we do not need it.
That would cause unnecessary disturbance in the wetland buffer that we didn't feel was appropriate.
I don't know. Strikes me as ignorance is bliss on that one, but I'll leave it at that. Okay. I don't, does our engineer have anything to say about that? Did they look at it? I mean, it's a pipe. It's a big pipe. It's right there. It's open. You can see it. You can touch it. You can feel it. It's coming
Yes,
off.
sir, but the inside is plugged solid.
We don't disagree. Again, the pipe is collapsed. It's filled with sediment. and
They removed it.
Tried to snake it with the camera, and we couldn't get more than 2 to 3 feet. To do anything more than that would create unnecessary disturbance, potentially more damage in the wetland buffer.
So you're proposing that you will leave that pipe where it is, basically for eternity or until an act of nature decides to do something with it.
Correct.
Strange, because it looks very odd to be there, but okay.
Commissioner O'Rourke.
Come off mute. Yeah, I have, I want to talk about Phil, but Chairman, let me know if you want to get into that now versus later. I thought there was you tell
We're
me.
all going to talk about Phil, so.
Okay.
We're coming around to Phil septic sewer. We've identified those issues. We all know they're coming. Let's roll through what we've got that is not Phil septic sewer.
Okay. I think one piece of information that would be helpful, I think you were very close to presenting it in your helpful presentation at the outset. Thanks for that. There was a page of that presentation with square footages, difference between proposed and actual, but I don't think that it had a row that was just the entire project, if I'm right. I'm curious with the latest update to the site plan. Well, I think if I remember right, the old square footage change was something like 2,800 to 4,600. And then also just the footprint, how much of a bigger footprint it is now of impervious, kind of ignoring 2-story type, stuff. Let me know if that question is clear enough that you can attempt to respond to it.
You'll be able to see, you'll see the total wetland buffer coverage.
Having some audio trouble. Can't really hear you.
And still, I'm still getting no audio.
Mr. Cordone's trying to speak. We're having a technical difficulty. One moment.
Well, there's been an increase in the proposed lot coverage from the existing to proposed.
So the existing is from the existing conditions, not compared to. So Mr. Rock, is your question from the prior plan to this plan or from the existing coverage?
Well, ultimately, it's only the latter that that I guess matters. But it seemed like maybe it would have been an improve or a lesser disturbance, perhaps based on the new. But I wanted to kind of try to be clear on where we're ending as far as. I think my main question would be to center around footprint of current impervious and footprint of proposed impervious. Understanding that in the wetland buffer, it's being neutral.
Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
Sorry,
Thanks.
I went to old school. I went to headphones and such. Okay, so if you look at our overall overall site on the bottom half, it talks about the existing coverage versus the proposed. Existing coverage on the site is about 3,150 square feet and proposed coverage is about 5,000 square feet.
Okay, and then just for color, is that 5,000 similar, less or more than the prior iteration?
It's less.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
significantly less because we did make the garage smaller. The driveway smaller. There's no longer a breezeway connecting the garage to the building.
And then I'm right to understand that without caveat, if you look at the wetland and wetland buffer, that's a neutral, that lot coverage is neutral, right?
That's correct. You'll see that that's up on the top half of that chart.
Yeah,
Where we break
yeah.
everything down right there and explain it.
Okay, thank you. And then Westchester County Department of Health, that's you're expecting something from them this week. What do you expect from them?
We've submitted the septic system plan and we hope to hear from them some comments on that. We've already had some verbal comments and gone through the plan with them. There's nothing really substantial. It's just some minor things that we're going to get written up that have to be addressed. Some notes that are required to be added and such.
Thanks. That's it for me. I'll want to just chime back in when we talk Phil, but thank you.
Can I ask one question about impervious coverage in wetlands buffers? Did the DEC, did you have to get a variance for impervious coverage in the DEC wetland buffer?
No, because it was less than 20% of the total site. The only variance that we needed from the DEC was for the house to be less than 100 feet from, or less than 75 feet from the edge of the wetland buffer. Edge of the wetland.
So you got a variance from the DEC?
Yes.
Commissioner Gelber, Tony?
Could we get an update on trees?
What's your question regarding the trees?
With this, so you haven't, this is a new site plan, so is the impact on the trees any different than the previous site plan?
Tony, that's my question. That's my question as well.
June, not a single tree has been cut down since our June meeting. Nothing's changed, not a single thing.
Okay, and with this site plan, nothing will change from the previous one?
That's not correct.
There's no previous, I'm sorry, there's no additional trees being removed.
Yes, there are. I'll show you. I have all three plans in front of me. That was going to be my point, Tony.
Okay, Martin, sounds like you're up.
All right.
Okay, so if I can share my screen. Okay, it says okay, here we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is where we started with trees. This is the 728 plan, 702 28 2020 plan. This is where we were on the last plan, and this is where we are on the new plan. So this tree here is going to be removed. That one's going to be removed. They're supposed to be, see, that's that tree, that's that tree.
Okay, the 24-inch oak that's on the, close to the property line, the reason that's being actually removed is that was brought up by Sven when he was out on the site and told us that it was actually a dangerous tree that should have been removed. The tree in the back that has that X in it right there by that 16-inch oak, I apologize, that seems to be, that should not be removed. That shouldn't be on there. If you look at the other plan, it doesn't show it as being removed.
Well, right, that's why I'm bringing it up, is because.
Yeah, that was an accident, that was,
Because if you remember, this is where we started with the amount of trees that were on the property, and then it got cut down to this. And now the new plan says that 2 more trees are gonna be removed.
So in fact, between the September plan and this plan, 2 trees are going to be saved. So we're not going to be removing any additional trees more than was previous. We're actually going to be saving 2.
Could someone summarize this? Because I think a few things were said, maybe by mistake, that were in conflict with what Martin just went through. So starting to proposed, I understand that it may be that some trees that were previously going to be removed are now not, but others that were not previously meant to be removed now are. Would anyone mind just summarizing the ins and outs here?
there's a 24-inch oak that's on the edge of the property that is shown right here on the edge. That discussions with the village's environmentalist, Sven Hoger, actually recommended that tree to be removed because it was a dangerous tree, because there was a lot of rot and it was not in a good condition.
Is he a certified arborist?
And is that in writing somewhere?
I'll have to look into that.
And I figured there was going to be more to the calculus than that, right? Are there others to consider? Because otherwise, then I think the statement would not be true that there's not fewer trees to be removed now than on the prior.
Actually, Rich, can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, since June, I've been sort of watching pretty attentively on these trees. And so I don't know what plan this is. Could whoever's
This plan right now is your current plan.
Thank you. Could you go to the September plan? I just went to Novus and downloaded the last engineering plan. It was
Yep,
the second
this is the
page.
last plan. Yep.
Perfect. Exactly. So this looks right. All right. So Rich, is that a mistake up top?
I believe it is.
All right. So, okay. So if that's a mistake, then that has to be on.
Excuse me, just really quick, the person who's speaking, would you identify yourself for the record, please?
No problem. It's the applicant, Bill Fedina, William. And so the two small trees on the right-hand side of the plan where the driveway is. By moving the garage towards the house, towards the road, excuse me, and having the driveway where we put it, those two trees are now unchecked. So that was one of our decisions. We wanted to make sure that.
Okay, I see that. Yep, these are unchecked. Okay, yep.
And then Sven, in his environmental report, he did identify that specific tree as it is dead and should be removed. It was the first paragraph of his report from the September submission. But no, he is not an arborist, to my knowledge. So if that tree has to be unchecked and an arborist comes and deems it the same way, happy to do that as well. I'm going to be very clear. There's no agenda to put in.
Well, no, it's a pretty large tree.
It is, and it's hollow. You can walk a small kid can walk inside it, and it's leaning on the neighbor's property. But again, I of course said I wasn't going to touch any tree since June, and that obviously I haven't. So
okay, well let me jump in here because this circles us back around to something that I alerted Mr. Joffrey to at the top of our discussion this evening, as I was drilling down on this as a floodplain problem, if you will. Floodplains bring into focus concerns about safety and damage to persons and property, and also erosion and erosion control. So as I was thinking about this as a floodplain problem on the new submission, I went back through the two sets of environmental reports we have, the applicants, Beth Evans, and the consulting engineer, Sven Hoger, and looking to see whether it had answered sort of erosion related questions around the trees. And it really didn't. We asked Sven specifically about the trees, and he gave us an answer that I think was very informative as to how the trees impact how we think about 7A44, the wildlife habitat and environment concerns, but not the erosion concerns. And as I was thinking about this from an erosion standpoint, it occurred to me that if you think about the trees as providing environmental services to the property and the neighborhood, we had asked a lot about the environmental services they provided as wildlife habitat, and we hadn't then focused at all on the environmental services they provided as soil stabilizing and anti-erosion measures. And our floodplain policies talk very bluntly about protect, especially 12, talk very directly about preserving natural barriers to erosion, and trees are those. Root systems stabilize soil, and we're in a jurisdictional wetland. We're in a tidal and a freshwater wetland for part of this property, and then a wetland buffer for much of the rest. And we're in an area that's going to be a septic leaching field above that on the current proposal. And so as I thought about that, I thought, I actually don't know the answer to the question. Does the removal of the trees that started off there at the beginning of the application and were not there by June, does the removal of those affect this floodplain as from an erosion standpoint? I don't know the answer to that. Is this consistent in the absence of something to replace the environmental services, as I look at my screen, provided by all those little X's when those were trees? So that's just a way of restating the question I stated to Mr. Joffrey at the beginning. And so that may not be something you can answer off the top of your head. It may be something that Mr. Joffrey can tell me now what you can do to get us a complete record on, though.
We can answer that. Currently, the stumps are still on site. They haven't been removed, so they are stabilized. The existing root structures in the ground, that's going to be providing stabilization until such time as should the project move forward. Under proposed conditions, all disturbed areas are going to be stabilized in accordance with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Blue Book Manual, which basically states that we are going to have to make sure that we have a vegetative surface throughout the entire site prior to the removal of any sediment and erosion control measures, such as temporary sediment basins and silt fences. So currently, the site is stabilized with existing vegetation, ground covers, and the existing root structures. Under proposed conditions, should the project move forward, it will be stabilized with a turf prior to the removal of any sediment and erosion control protection measures.
Okay, and as I'm looking at this, do we have a map that shows the complete extent of the disturbed area during construction?
Yeah, can I share my screen again? Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
So we're going to go over to our sediment and erosion control plan.
Commissioner, while he's looking for that, Chair, I'm just thinking about the tree ordinance that we are also working on simultaneously. Are there any provisions in that for the removed trees that have already been taken out, that other trees have to be planted in kind? Does that already exist in the tree ordinance?
It's not law yet.
So there's no existing tree ordinance at all?
There's no existing law that I know of that would provide a requirement that and if there were, we wouldn't be having this part of the conversation, right?
Right. Well, that was my question. So
the question is under, thank you. But this to me is an issue under 12, whether there's a set of natural barriers to erosion that we have to account for here, that have to work their way back into this plan. Obviously, trees that have just been chopped down, the root system continues to exist, but not for all that long. It
Right.
rots away, and over time, it's going to stop providing the erosion control it otherwise would. Does grass in the, there's a lot of trees that used to be there in the area, maybe a third of the way from the wetland boundary up towards the buffer, and some of those are not there anymore. And it looks to me,
Chairman
just,
Burke?
I mean, the short answer we just got is,
Chairman Burt?
well, it's, go ahead.
So a mature tree, 100-foot tree in a growing season will absorb about 11,000 gallons of water. So one mature tree, about 100, a tall one, big one, will absorb about 11,000 gallons of water a year. So how many trees did we lose?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It has to be, Mr. Joffrey, do you know? It's got to be, they're not the big canopy anchor trees, but there are quite a few of them.
Yeah,
Well, all of them contribute to a canopy, and we lost the forest full on this property.
Well,
I'm not aware of how many were lost, and certainly couldn't equate that to the gallons as Mr. Gelb did over the course of a year. That being said, as you heard from Mr. Cordone, there are plantings that are going to be proposed. The stabilization is absolutely required, and we need to demonstrate that as we move forward. So at the end of the day, I understand your comment and your question. It's a good one, particularly as it relates to the policies that you must apply, but that has to be met as moving forward.
I hear you. There is you can put grass on something and stabilize it within the meaning of the requirements DEC puts on you. There's a limit to my technical knowledge here. I'm not a botanist and I'm not an erosion scientist, but it is not at all obvious to me that stabilizing it within the meaning of DEC requirements is the same thing as having natural barriers to erosion that match the anti-erosion capacity of what's been removed in trees and root systems. I would like to know that. I don't feel like I can look at 12 and think about natural barriers to erosion and just say, well, if it's stabilized within the meaning of DEC, that does it. I'm not sure it does. I think you can probably stabilize an area that's been disturbed and satisfy your DEC requirements and still have removed natural barriers to erosion of the kind we talk about in 12. So I'm telling you what record I need. I would like to be able to look at a record that tells me that I have not voted consistent on a property where significant barriers to erosion have been removed and not replaced by something that does the same job. You follow me?
Yeah, I think I understand where you're getting at. I don't know that we have anything in the record right now to satisfy what you need in terms of the record. It's something that we could take a look at in a little bit more detail, and I'm confident between Mr. Cordone and Ms. Evans, we could probably put together a narrative or additional information that will address that concern for you, beyond just what DEC needs, but more in terms of addressing policy number 12.
Yeah, and if as they look at it, if as they look at it, there is more that needs to be done to satisfy the requirement that, look, the trees are gone, right? We can't uncut the trees. But if there's some kind of replanting, yeah, Doreen, I think we're going the same place. But it's entirely possible in my mind that as they look at it, to be able to say that they've got the same kind of natural barrier to erosion that they had when the trees were there, some other kind of planting is necessary. But whatever the record needs to be to satisfy that concern, look, there's two ways that we can satisfy a concern in this commission, right? we raise something, and then either we get more information when we realize that it's no bar to consistency, or we get a change that causes it to be no bar to consistency.
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do is I'd like to have Beth Evans reach out to Mr. Hoger, maybe have GMC involved, and to the extent, look, again, this is just, this is off the top of my head. If there's a particular area because of removal of a tree that requires an additional planting or low-level plantings or whatever it might be, and that's necessary, we can investigate that and give you that answer and hopefully have that for you for next month. And we'll put that together through the professionals who can determine if that is necessary, and if it is necessary, what's required there.
Thank you.
Another
Yeah,
part
I'm
of
open to what the professionals say. I just know how to, I just know how to ask the questions.
Another
Go ahead,
part
Doreen.
of policy 12, another part of policy 12 is excavations that you're doing in the wetlands buffer that also deals with policy 12. I'd like to know, because your explanation in your narrative on policy 12 doesn't explain how grading is beneficial to the natural protective feature, the wetland, or how it adversely impacts. And those are the things that you're supposed to do with each policy. State the benefits or adverse impacts. And I didn't see that written on any of the policies on the narrative. So the grading, excavation that you're doing. It's also in a floodplain. So when you, I know this is minuscule, you have a couple of areas that you're going to do. One is on the left-hand side of the, where the house is. You're going to excavate that also to the 7-foot contour.
Yes. So I don't see, a requirement in policy 12 to specifically address grading and excavation. I do understand the comment from Ms. Roney. We could take a look back again at the response, particularly as it relates to this new revised and we believe significantly improved plan. To the extent that we need to supplement the response to policy 12, we'll evaluate that as part of our next submission.
Because you're doing that in the freshwater wetlands buffer, which DEC doesn't regulate. We do. The other thing is policy 37 includes the best management practices along with policy 12. They're sort of similar. How we're preventing the non-point discharge of excessive nutrients, organics, and eroded soils into coastal waters. Can it be provided to the commission flow paths of the actual sheet flow or surface flow with your with all of the changes in grade where you anticipate the water?
Management prevention plan.
Pardon?
That's in the existing drainage. That's the proposed drainage area maps that have been prepared in the stormwater pollution prevention plan.
Right, but they don't match up to this new drawing.
Yes, they do.
They do? Can you show that plan?
Mr. Cordone
Yeah,
is just.
I'm sorry, give me a moment.
So just if you could bear with us one moment.
I apologize. I should have clarified that.
My only concern is the septic field and where, in the 100-year storm and flood conditions, where that nice nutritive value of what is in the leaching field goes.
That's a 100-year storm. You're going to get surface water. The subsurface septic system, that water is going to be discharged below grade into the soils, into the existing soils, and that's going to be treated soils. That's going to be treated water by the time it gets into the ground.
You have primary treatment through the septic tank, and then you're going to have a secondary treatment that's going to be handled in the gravel on the absorption fields, and then you're going to have a tertiary treatment that filters it down even more once it touches the biomat and gets broken down in the biomat at that soil water at the gravel soil interface is part of the absorption fields.
So you're saying the hydrology of the site is not saturated at that point?
No, that's surface water. The site doesn't act like a sponge necessarily, where every drop of water that hits the ground immediately flows into it. A good part of it sheet flows off the top or flows off of the top. That's the stormwater that's being treated and being handled and being cleaned and being addressed.
Understood, but in the 100-year storm, it's flooding conditions. So it's going to be at 13, right? It's an AE 13 zone?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So when you look at this, well, this doesn't have it. Let me look at the other one. So the first floor elevation is at 13 with crawl, right? I can't see what's behind where your cursor is.
It's at 16.
First floor elevation is what?
16.
Supposed to be 16.
Right, but what's the elevation where the crawl is starting?
9.
And that's going to be lower than base flood elevation of 13.
That's correct. The bottom of those septic fields is going to be at approximately elevation 13.5 and 13.25, which is above, if you were above the 100-year flood elevation.
I have no capacity to understand how that works, but I'm just asking questions to try to sort it out in my mind.
All right, I want to keep moving forward. So we've heard from everybody except me and Andrew, and I kind of know what I want to talk about, but I want to hear Andrew first.
So getting back to the septic system and the need for fill, we discussed alternatives to the septic system. Has the applicant done anything with that in that regard?
In terms of, I believe, and I understand from the last meeting, that it was directed by your commission to have Mr. Hildebrand and Ms. Mason look into that specifically with regard to additional information, and that you were not looking for additional information from the applicant.
Well, it's so we've got a memo from Mr. Hildebrand that I thought was somewhat informative. It says essentially there are 3 options here, and one would obviously be a septic, which is what's proposed, and the 2 other options would be private sewer and public sewer, and that both of those appear viable. Now, I know, Mr. Joffrey, you know, part of the downside of being good in front of us is that we then know you're good. So when I read the Ms. Motel's letter of the 4th, the cover letter for the new submission, I picked up on something that, because I've seen the Cuddy and Fetter team a few times now, it struck me as a careful choice of words and therefore noteworthy. Given the considerable changes to the project and the lack of impacts resulting from no increase in impervious coverage, this for page 5, within the wetland buffer, we respectfully submit that further analysis on the feasibility of a sewer connection is no longer necessary. And the paragraph continues. Where we started was, as I understood it, essentially a claim that it was impossible, legally, practically couldn't be done. And we had a pretty thorough discussion of that. And I don't think we ended with it can't be done. and now that I've read the letter of November 4, I'm pretty sure that the answer is it can't be done, because where you're at now is that you submit that further analysis is no longer necessary, which isn't the same as we can't do it. That's, we think the septic works, so we don't want to have to talk anymore about sewer. These are obviously interrelated issues, because I've been, I think, as forthright as I can, that a big part of this is the use of fill in a wetland adjacent area, in a low-lying lot, in a floodplain, and how much of it. And of course, I do recognize that 400 and some cubic yards is a lot less than 1,000 and some cubic yards. The only reason the fill is necessary is because the septic is necessary. The only reason the septic is necessary is because the applicant doesn't want to do a sewer. And part of what, and like in basically every way that one could say it's preferable, a sewer is a preferable option, except that it implicates approvals and cost. And I recognize the real world, but in every other way, from an environmental and public policy standpoint, from the standpoint of getting the human waste away from the people, it's preferable to do a sewer. And so we run into this interconnected Jenga puzzle where the major issues that people keep raising about this are all around whether a septic is really the best tool for the job. So of course we find ourselves, as we often do, asking the applicant to consider alternatives. Now, last time we told you that we weren't going to wait for this meeting for anything more from the applicant, because we really wanted to discuss it with our counsel and hear from the engineer. In the event, discussions with our counsel have not resulted in something that we want to put on the open record. We ended up just having attorney-client privilege discussions. But we have a memo from the engineer that seems to indicate to me that it's not impossible, that there are sewer options. So since there are sewer options, and we feel certainly bound at least to fully explore those, your invitation to stop talking about it, to phrase it pointedly, is not one I think I can take up. I think we have to fully understand what the sewer options are, because in many ways it would solve the problems that many of us are looking at.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly appreciate how you characterize that, and please don't ever take anything that we try to do as advocates for an applicant is not to shut down any further discussion. You know us long enough, and through many applications, that we don't operate that way. So I don't believe that was an intended purpose with whatever language was in that submission. I think the question is an appropriate question.
I'm not offended. I'm not offended. You're representing your client. But we really have to understand we really have to understand the sewer option here, because it would solve a lot of problems.
Understood. And Mr. Fedina has gone through verbally in the past with you some of his experiences with investigating this issue. We do have a few slides that we'd like to walk you through that will address this a little bit further. Obviously, I can't speak to Mr. Hildebrand's memorandum that has not been shared with the applicant. To the extent that you can provide that to us, we can certainly review it and provide our response. And I would ask for a copy of that. I'm assuming it's not a privileged document, but if we're going to share our screen in just a moment and walk you through some of the history, I think the timeline and the investigation that the Fedinas have done with respect to this issue will be probative, and we can continue the discussion as we go through these slides.
Thank you again. And William, it's Bill Fedini, the applicant, just announcing myself this time. So sure, that in the July meeting and again September, I did give some history, but I figured I'll just go step by step of what we've done, because the next page will start, 2 pages will start with a timeline. But in terms of on the back of the last September meeting, to the Monday after the meeting on September 20th, you saw the narrative, Kristen's narrative. We provided a bunch of information. I'll just, we went through all the houses, all of these are, so the public docs that are filed, the sewer pipe maintenance agreement for all the private lines, the manhole agreement for the private lines, as-built sewer drawings, a road survey, letter that myself and 4 neighbors sent to the village manager, the general foreman, village engineer in 2019, and the response letter. Those are the highlights. And these are outlined in the narrative. There's a few more easements that we also sent over. And I almost want to jump to the timeline because it really does highlight a little bit about this list. And along up the next slide here is, I'll just show it because it sort of shows the nice soup effect of who's on public, who's on septic, who's on private sewer line, but split between the public road and the private side of the road. It took me about 5 months to produce this chart, and the former village engineer didn't even know this was the case. Just again, to make that known, putting this together sort of helped out a lot of people. Seeing the status of the septic and sewer on the road.
Can I ask a question on that slide?
This timeline, I'm sorry, was someone asking a question? I'm sorry.
Of those that are on septic and sewer, of the properties, how many of them came before the village with a new application?
Well, maybe, Doreen, if I can help, the first 1996 is when the first private line came in. And hopefully you can see this. In 1997, an easement was filed for the neighbor to connect to that private line. And in 2005 to 7, that's when the 9 private sewer lines were installed for the 5 houses. And the sewer maintenance agreement that was signed by the village. So they were obviously, and the consulting village engineer at the time sort of approved, recommended, and obviously approved the project. So I can't speak to the one in 1996 or 97, but in 2005 to 7, yes, that the documents, they are public documents. Obviously, we furnished them on September 20th, but the 2005, the installation of these loans, yes, was definitely known by the village at that time.
So I'm sorry, I'm looking at this list and this historical timeline. Applicant inquires about getting a new private sewer line.
Correct. Rejected.
What was the application to do at that time?
Yep. So that was when I hired JMC. I went right to the village engineer with JMC. He said, we are no longer putting in private sewer lines. That was verbal. The February 2019 was a letter that we furnished to the village manager, general foreman, and the village engineer, saying we would like to use an empty private sewer line. Can we connect to that? It's already there. No. And the reason for the no, it was in the letter, of course, that we furnished.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
So, and this is on point here. The letter from Hernani that Ms. Motel referenced cites a law in the Westchester County Sanitary Code. I read, and Mr. Hernani improperly cited that law. I read that law, and it says that new construction has to be hooked up to a sewer. It doesn't say anything about septics. It doesn't say anything about what's better, but that particular law says new construction has to be connected to a sewer.
It says if there's a
So
sewer available within 100 feet of a house, Chairman Maggio, then it's required.
Let me just finish the point. I then looked at the entire code and all the relevant sections about sewer lines and septic systems. And the spirit of that Westchester County Sewer Code says that sewer systems or sewer lines are better than septic systems. And the idea is that, sewer lines take the sewage to a wastewater treatment plant, the water's treated rather than just leaching into the ground. And it also goes so far as to say that if a house is on a septic system and a sewer line becomes available, the homeowner is obligated to switch from the septic system to the sewer system. So when you bring up new information now that there's an existing line out there, whether it's public or private, that could be connected to, that seems like a much better alternative. And if we're just relying on what a former village engineer said, I think that should be explored. That sounds like a win-win for everybody. There's an empty line, it's in the ground, and the only person objecting to that was the former village engineer.
But, this is probably a good time.
You and I are in violent agreement on that topic. We had the same thing. If you go to the next page, so we said, oh, of course, well, let's connect. I read the same code. I used it against Hernani. I said, okay, well, why can we not do that? Okay, well, you can't have two connections to a private sewer line. And so I said, why not? Well, because then it wasn't installed in accordance with the Mamaroneck Code of Installing Public Sewer Lines. It was done privately. I said, well, I don't like that answer. I'll get the sewer line pressure tested, which I did in July of 19. And then Hernani agreed, okay, well, you did that. So, what about making that private sewer line public? Okay, well, then you can't have a private and public sewer line in the same trench. Okay, why not? So again, you'll see this. We sort of spent almost 2 years, and finally, when we ran out of every solution from A to B, we said, okay, we're going on septic. So you can sort of see 2 years and tens of thousands of dollars and that many more man hours has been going what you're saying. And I agree with you. We wanted sewer. We thought it was easier. We went to all our neighbors multiple times saying, could we all band together and do this? So it's been tough for us as well. So now let's getting to the sort of crux of it. Okay, you can't have a private and public sewer line in the same trench because if one breaks, who knows what it is, you could call further damage to other lines. It's a liability the village wouldn't want to have. Okay, fine. Well, let's just eliminate everything. And I'm sorry, I know Rich from JMC wants to talk. He was there for the last few years. Let's just pretend that the engineering feasibility, no problem, from every setback to any other utility. Let's say we can solve that engineering wise. Let's say that money is not an issue, which frankly, that's a humongous issue, and we can talk on that, but let's say that's not an issue. If you have a private line, and Andrew, you mentioned the exact code we saw. When a sewer line passes your house, you're obligated to connect. I was like, great. That's in my layman's term. I'm like, great. Okay, well, that's the rub, because we have many neighbors that said, I spent, it's a confidential number, but it has a lot of zeros putting in these private lines. No way. I don't know how you can force someone, and there's a lot of lawyers on the call. I'm not one. I don't know if it's eminent domain. Like, how can you force someone to give up their private property to connect to something else? And I think that's where a number of my neighbors said, there's no chance I will do that. And that ultimately was another reason. I don't know the answer to that. If you can force them with compensation, maybe. I don't know those answers, but everything fed into, if we could just get to one solution that worked. And that's you could sort of see the almost 2 years of brainstorming to try to get this through. I ended up hiring all the firms in 06 to 07, paying the money just to get all these plans and be able to give them to the village, to let them know this is what's under there. They didn't even know any of this. So I'm with you from a desirability standpoint. And if we can make it happen, and if the village can force it through and force all my neighbors to give up their private lines, that's a great conclusion, but I don't know how that works. I don't know if it's possible with.
Yeah, let me just be clear. I'm not saying we should force anyone to do something they don't want to do. I'm just saying if there's an empty line, and I understand the prohibition against two people in a private line makes it a quasi-public line, but you're saying there's an empty, unused line that's an extra out there?
It is owned by someone. It's not owned by the village. It's owned by an individual.
So
Okay.
I don't, let's just say it took 6 months to even potentially get a price on that. And even then it wasn't a yes, frankly, but so it's someone's private property we're referring to, not just a village line.
So, Mr. Fenton, let me ask you this. Are you, have you done any research as to what it would cost to run a private sewer from your lot out to the main sewer?
Well, before we, yeah, I mean, before we talk costs, we're exploring feasibility, right?
Right. Yeah, I just, in general, just want to know, is that something, if it's feasible to run a private sewer line, would you be open to that, or would you not be open to that?
Yes, if I could put a private sewer line tomorrow, the funds to do it, no, I'm not open to that because I have a sense of that, and that was way higher than frankly, I asked 4 neighbors to contribute and still the numbers didn't work. But if there was a line, yes, I would connect to it. I want to connect to a sewer line. I've wanted it for 2 years.
This is probably a good time to hear from Brian.
Sure. I mean, the applicant has certainly had a history here of trying to get an easy solution, but I don't think there is an easy solution. It is a shame that there's empty pipes in the road that, but as it was stated, they're owned or private property. So unless there's some agreement, the only.
Let me start with that. If the owner of the existing unused sewer line would sell, lease, or otherwise be persuaded to make it available, is there any engineering or code reason why that would not work? Why Mr. Fedina could not hook his property to that line if he had the owner's permission to do so?
Right. Yeah. That's no different than cutting a trench tomorrow and putting a brand new line in. There's no.
Okay.
There's no difference.
If Mr. Fedina were willing to pay the cost of cutting his own trench and laying his own pipe all the way from the nearest extent of the public line, is there any engineering or code reason why he could not do that?
As long as I'm just not familiar with the private road about who gives that authority to install it, but engineering wise and approval wise, no, there's nothing.
Okay, so the only barrier to do that would be permission to open the road.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Joffrey, you probably can answer that. Who would have to grant permission to open the road?
We would need to take a look at exactly how the road ownership is. There's many different documents that could lead to different results. The third question I would add on that is, opening up the private road, engineering can be done, and then the cost to bring that line in and from where, and the extent of that cost and whether it's cost prohibitive.
Right. And then just to bring in, the reality of the constructability of doing that long parallel excavation to all these existing lines, the sewer lines, as mentioned before. So yes, they're being feasible and being easy are two very separate things in this case.
Well, there's no easy here, right? I mean, we're sitting here talking about this application after many other conversations about this application because easy is not on the table. But trucking in cubic yard after cubic yard, hundreds of cubic yards of fill for a new septic that sits over, bedrock and a floodplain is not easy. Installing a new septic is not easy. If it were easy, we would already have found consistency and moved on. So we're talking about the most palatable, if not easy, options here, and I think we all understand that. It's I've never seen an application that was difficult to decide where there was an easy solution.
The other part of this
Go ahead, Doreen.
is the thing that we have to go by all of these 44 policies within the Coastal Management Program in the state of New York. The standard is consistent to the maximum extent practicable. And costs are never involved.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Tony.
at one of the meetings, there was a statement made, and I don't remember by whom, but that there was smell of sewage in that road. And I was of the opinion that that would be an environmental, or was an environmental hazard. And we were thinking that maybe we could get the village to check out whether that in fact was happening. My point being that if there are problems with some of those existing lines, that might be a wedge or a lever to get the homeowners to start to rethink their position on, say, either letting the applicant use that empty line or putting in a public sewer line, which might. So did we get any answer to what that smell? There was supposedly raw sewage in that trench or something, or down when you look down the manhole?
I have an answer for you, Tony.
Thanks, Andrew.
I spoke to the building inspector about that, and I believe he went out there with Tony Iacovelli, and they inspected. There's an inspection port or a manhole there. They didn't see any signs of leakage. I then discussed it with the village manager, who wanted the county to get involved in this and to inspect it. And I just followed up with the village manager today, and he said that the county was still not responding to that request. So, we've tried. I wish Frank was on the call because that was a while ago, and he could confirm that conversation. But I have had ongoing conversation with the village manager, and it's just a matter of trying to get the county to respond, which they have not.
Actually, Andrew, that's another really good point. Brian, you're saying it's feasible. The county would tell Hernani no. So the question is, who are the people who are in charge of saying it's feasible, and are they all the people answering right now?
Yeah,
Brian, I'd appreciate you letting us know that too, because that's we ran into that as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything. I mean, I saw Hernani's letter, which was discussing connecting to an existing line that's occupied, which makes it a public sewer main, which wasn't feasible because no one saw it be installed. So I didn't see anything from the history that said we're not doing sewer connections. The county won't allow sewer connections. I spoke to Mr. Tony Cunny at the health department last week or the week before. Went over the just verbally went over the plan, the idea, and it was his in agreement that it's it's up to the applicant. It's the applicant's decision to install a private long sewer service, but that would be that is allowed. I mean, and then only the village would be involved in the connection to their public main, but everything from the house to the connection would be the responsibility of the applicant.
The other part of this puzzle is you put it in. I get it. It's you can make it work. You have New York State Industrial Code 753, which basically puts in a mechanism that makes the applicant, the homeowner, responsible for this 1,500 linear feet of line to out at a moment's notice and mark it out for the underground utilities to be able to if somebody hits it during construction, to be out there. They don't have the mechanism in place for something like that. That's not how private lines were, when you talk about a sanitary sewer service, generally 9 times out of 10, I mean, Brian and I have worked on hundreds of these. I know it. And you're going from the edge of the road to the building to run a line parallel with underneath a road alongside 11 other private sewer lines. It's it's asking for disaster to add another one to an already mix of spaghetti. And that was Hernani's engineering thought, and that's how he thought about it, and that's how he conveyed it to us. And honestly, as an engineer, it makes a lot of sense. We don't want to add and take a problem that's already existing, exacerbate it.
So but I need to ask a question about that. Isn't every other private sewer line on the road subject to the same marking obligation?
It is, but there's no enforcement. The village has no, if the village goes out there tomorrow to repair a storm drain and strikes one of these existing force mains, they're not going to know how to contact precisely who owns this main, who's going to repair it. How are they going to hold anybody because there's no actual marking on the material in there?
Well, my point though is I understand from a utility perspective, that's really not ideal, but the fact that that code exists neither puts a different obligation on this applicant than is on anyone else who's on a private sewer on that road, nor did that bar them from doing their private sewer lines.
Chairman, just because it's been done in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea to continue moving forward. You look at a lot of the development that's taken place, in the past, and now we're sitting back rethinking the way that we did some of our things. Stormwater management, we've gone through the leaps and bounds in the ways that we design it today compared to how we did in 2005 when these private sewer lines were installed. It's remarkably different. We can't, just because it was done at one time doesn't mean we should continue to do it the same way.
I hear that, and there are things that as a citizen I could nod and say, yeah, that's a consideration that I consider compelling. But as a commissioner, I've got 44 policies that I'm supposed to look at, and consistency is binary. And so in that sense, if a project is consistent one way and not consistent another way, that's how I got to vote. And if that means that somebody does something that from an engineering standpoint that gores someone else's ox is really not preferable and makes a spaghetti mess with 8 lines or 9 lines, a spaghetti mess with 9 lines or 10 lines, that's where I say, look, consistency is consistency, and that it is not preferable from a utility standpoint is kind of not my problem.
How is the fact that we're...
I understand. And Mr. Chairman, you raise a valid point. One of the things I will offer for your consideration is, and we're still trying to figure out where we need to get to at the end of this discussion and what's right here. But one of the things that the commission can consider, and in all of your resolutions, when you take a look at and making your determination, there's generally a resolve clause that identifies that a project will not substantially advance the policy set forth in the LWRP, but will not substantially hinder the achievement of the policies. Therefore, there's no obstacle in finding consistency with the LWRP. So that might be something that we might need to investigate further in this regard as it relates to this issue. But we're still trying to figure out what can be done, what can't be done, what's practical, what's feasible. And to address the comment that Ms. Roney made before, and I'm just going to throw an absurd number out there, but at the end of the day, if it's $100 million in order to bring this private sewer line, and yes, engineering is feasible, it's not going to get done. It's not feasible. It's not going to happen. It's not practical. And I think if the hard line would be that if this commission, again, using this extreme example, would be that at the end of the day, there's any number of properties that are situated similarly, and if redevelopment needs to be done, or there's failing septic systems in the area, and if it was going to require that each of those homeowners to take care of, remedy, restore, put in a new septic system that is for the benefit of everybody, it would have a chilling effect if it's basically indicating that you're going to have to come in and bring in a private sewer line or a public sewer line at an extreme cost. And that sends a very chilling message to the homeowners and prospective homeowners, and even commercial property owners and potential development within the village. I think that's something that needs to be considered here.
I think what the problem is here, Mr. Godfrey, is the fact that this is a private road. And the other thing is when I looked at policy 44 personally, I also look at the fact that this area is a fish and wildlife habitat, locally designated, and it's a critical environmental area, which is done by the county because Long Island Sound is an estuary of national importance. So
And you
it's,
have a failing septic system right now, which is potentially, I mean, granted, the home is not habitable and there's nobody living there, but to the extent that you have a failing septic system, and if someone was going to be there, assuming they can, there's potential of effluent going into that tributary and into those critical environmental areas. I think it's within everybody's interest to either restore, put in a new septic system to the extent, and you've heard from the applicant, if it was feasible and he could do so, he would have had the sewer line engineered already.
Yeah, let me just make two quick points about the sewer line. I think the environmental benefits of not having to bring in as much fill and not having that untreated sewage in that area, those positive environmental benefits far outweigh any engineering or construction headache that you might have with a new line and with dealing with the 8 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever other existing lines are there. And the second thing is don't forget the cost of a piece of real property improved by a sewer line, in my opinion, is worth more than a piece of real property that's serviced by a septic system. So that money spent, you know, again, it helps the environment, it helps the homeowner. It's one less thing for the homeowner to maintain, and it's an enhancement of the value of that lot.
So just to keep us moving, moving forward and getting as much done as we can tonight, Mr. Joffrey, I said before that this presented sort of an interlocking Jenga puzzle, because the only reason that you need the fill is because you need the septic, and the only reason you need the septic is because you need a sewer solution that has proven thorny and difficult so far. About the fill, I think this is where I'm just going to tell you that I would like you to help me help you. I have to interpret the policies in a way that can be consistent from one applicant to another. I have to interpret the policies in a way that I think are fair to their explanations in the LWRP and the reasons that my neighbors put me on this commission. And I have to do it in a way that doesn't do violence to them shifting from one application to the next. Now, I think you've been in front of us enough to have heard me, probably yourself 5 or 6 times, talk about the no net fill rule. And you've probably got a sense, though I don't think I've quite articulated in this way before, that while the no net fill rule is embodied in the floodplain code, which is not our policy, the interest that we serve under 11, which incorporates existing law by reference, right? It says that we meet 11 by the other laws that we have that impact floodplain management. 11, 12, and 17, I look at, if not as a per se rule, I look at the existence of net fill as a strong principle, even a presumptively disallowed thing in a floodplain. Now, obviously, there have been projects that have, where at least one in my time, where we have allowed on the property a net fill in an area that in a property that also had floodplain. And I'm talking about One Shore Road because when we discussed this with Ms. Motel, very early on, she said to me, but the commission has previously approved projects that have net fill. And she was unable in the subsequent submission to show exactly where on the property fill went. And I'm pretty sure that the fill was actually outside the floodplain portion of One Shore Road, but we did allow net fill on a property that had floodplain on it. I said before that you're good and did a good job of representing your clients. If I have 3 more projects in the next 2 years that come before me where their proposal is to put net fill in a floodplain, it as likely as not, you're going to represent one of those applicants, and you're going to look at me and you're going to say, but Chairman, you previously allowed net fill in a floodplain. I think of net fill in a floodplain as a strongly disfavored thing that we generally should not do, because projects that require the applicant to put net fill in a floodplain are generally putting people and property in harm's way and risking erosion. I think if we treat it as, if not an absolute bar, a strongly disfavored thing, that is more than rationally, but strongly related to turning down things that are not consistent with the policies 11, 12, and 17. And I need to be consistent in saying that. How do I impose a limiting principle that allows me to keep telling applicants that we just don't really let people put net fill in floodplains and still vote consistent if this applicant has to have net fill in a floodplain?
Thank you for that explanation. I think that is very helpful in identifying what you're struggling with as it relates to this application and other applications. I would start with a comment that was made, I think, 2 meetings ago with respect to this application, where every application is different. Every application is unique. I think someone on your commission, it might have been even Ms. Roney that said that. Every application is going to stand on the merits and the facts and circumstances of each individual and different application. I think your commission needs to evaluate each application, whether it's this present application in its current form, whether it's an applicant that is proposing 20 cubic yards of net fill, one that's proposing 1,000 cubic yards of net fill. I think you have to look at the different circumstances on where that application is as it relates to the policies. And what I'm hearing from you is, and thank you for the Jerry Maguire quote, but I think what we need to do is provide you a further narrative as it relates to policies 11, 12, and 17 to demonstrate how we are consistent to the extent that is practical. And I know you don't like to use terms mitigate or minimize, and I think that's kind of where you're getting at with how you characterized a response and addressing those policy numbers. So I agree with you in terms of we have to demonstrate how this proposal is consistent. I would offer 2 additional points. One, as part of that response, we will demonstrate how we will not put people at harm. And I think we've put some of that in writing to you. We can further expound on that and address the erosion comment, because that's something I heard several times this evening. I would also indicate that there is, the primary jurisdiction for this question is with the planning board, and there's a variance that is proposed with the floodplain development permit. So those are the standards, as you explain them in different form and in different words, that we must demonstrate to the planning board as part of that variance application. So we will do that once we get to the planning board, and in a supplemental submission, we will further address it in a different form, because the standards that the planning board uses in the variance for the flood development permit and for you in review of consistency with the LWRP policies, while they're more or less the same argument or same facts or the same demonstration of how the application is going to be presented and how the proposal will address those different standards, they're presented differently, they're demonstrated differently in words. As a litigator, I'm sure you can appreciate those differences, but I think I understand what you need from us in order to give you that comfort level so that you can meet your charge and vote with confidence that we have demonstrated consistency with those policies. So we have a little bit of work to do on that. And if there's anything additional that you or other commissioners or staff or consultants are looking for, I would love to hear that so that we can give you a comprehensive response as we move forward.
Mr.
Can I make,
Chiappa?
Myself, I think, I don't hide the ball. I tell you what my concerns are as straightforwardly and forthrightly as I can. That's
And we appreciate
all
it.
I've got for tonight, but it sounds like other people have something else to say.
Mr.
Doreen?
Geoffrey, I'd like to correct what you said for the record. I didn't speak to applications. I spoke to every application is different based on where that application is and what the circumstances are surrounding it. So while you're doing your LWRP narratives, I'd like you to consider something vitally important in a floodplain and a wetlands. Deal with the question of how sedimentation impacts wetland and wildlife habitat. Thank you.
Okay, I heard somebody else's voice. Was one of the other?
yeah. Yeah, I have a comment as well. So I think what we've seen from this application, and I've asked pretty much the same question each time. So I'd say it's a matter of the record. I think, and I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong. I'm only trying to be approximate here, but I think this application started with 1,700 square feet of net fill. And I think I asked, what could be done to limit this? And the answer was basically nothing. And then the application was able to come back again in September with, I think, 1,100. And we asked what could be done to limit this. And the answer was basically nothing there. It was even a real precise answer. We said, what if we just kept the house the exact same size, no more bedrooms? The answer was at most 100 cubic feet come off. And then we come back now with 460. Now this is all good, but just from a perspective of what we should expect is the next, can we go lower? And if not, why this time is that answer different than it has been in the past? And don't necessarily need to respond to that now, but I feel like that's how the record has looked in response to that question when I've asked it each time.
Fair comment, and we'll consider a response for a supplemental submission, but thank you, Mr. O'Rourke.
Thanks. And then I have one other comment, which is, I think we've talked around this, but maybe not directly. I think an environmental expert's assessment, either ours or yours or both, on what just what the impact of net fill in a flood zone is, could be helpful as well.
Actually, what would be important there is, as I had asked for at our work session, our floodplain administrators back up on what the code says about adding fill and the required excavation. Maybe our engineer can do that to make sure that there's no increase in the flood heights.
Yeah, I mean, typically
well,
the applicant would do a no rise analysis of,
Yeah.
But I don't, I didn't want to bring that up in case, because we're talking about precedent, so, I don't know if the numbers would help the board make a decision.
It's not
we can
really
take
the numbers. It's not really the numbers, Brian. It's the fact that our code says something, and we have several policies. And if you look at our consistency law, we can back up our policies. Our policies are backed up by what's in our code. So, I'd like information from our floodplain administrator, because it's a question I'd asked at our work session, at our last work session, as to how this is compliant with floodplain development code in an AE zone. Ordering of E zone.
All right.
I have something, Thomas.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, this will be quick. So also, because this is, in a floodplain and so close to marshlands, will the septic system also have a nitrogen removing component?
That's a question I hadn't thought to ask. Okay.
Oh, can I just make one quick request of Mr. Joffrey?
Do I get an answer on that, or?
Go ahead, Martin. Is there an answer for Martin?
Did anybody on the other side hear that question? Or
Mr. Cordone is trying to respond. Can you hear him?
I cannot.
About now.
Very, very brief, very faint.
Mr. Cordone is putting his headset on, and I think you hear him better when he has the headset on. Just one moment. Apologize.
The systems,
Can't hear you.
Well, it's showing that his mic is off right now.
I'm sorry. How's that? Are we good?
That's
we
much
go.
better. We can
There
hear.
we are. I apologize, guys, this technical thing. Even though I'm a young guy, I should be better at this. Okay, so all the septic systems designed in Westchester County in this mannerism, you're going to have your primary treatment, like I discussed previously, with your septic tank, which handles the anaerobic bacteria in there that are going to eat up a lot of the regular household waste and such. And basically, what you're going to get to the fields is you're going to get it's going to break down the material even more. I'm trying to be polite here with my word usage. It's going to break down the material even more. And then you're going to get a tertiary treatment at the edge of what's called the biomat, which is where aerobic bacteria live. And that's at the edge of your gravel trench and your soils. And that's where a lot of your nitrogen removal is going to take place. So basically, under a normal residential application, additional nitrogen removal is not required. It's handled with this traditional septic system method.
Well, I understand that, but that's why I'm saying we are in a special circumstance here because of where this house is located.
I understand, but but it's still going to work the same way as everything else. It's still a residential application. It's not a residential house waste. It's not going to be any type of industrial or commercial or chemical waste going into the septic system.
Will it
Yeah,
be
but
part of the stormwater plan then?
I'm sorry?
Will it be part of the stormwater plan to address the runoff?
The runoff, you're saying for fertilizers? I believe our stormwater plan, we talk about not using any fertilizers.
Okay, but if they do, if somebody comes along and puts fertilizer on their lawn, if he sells the house to somebody else who uses fertilizer.
All right. We'll look,
That might
we'll
have
get-
to be a covenant that runs with it. We've done that.
Mr. Chairman,
Who enforces that?
Hold on. Tony had a comment, and I want to hear what he has to say.
well, can I just recap on what Seamus was saying, the three kind of levels of fill. The first time was 1,100 cubic feet. If they kept the original house, what was the comment?
I think it was Tony, it was 1,700, 1,100, 460 roughly, I believe, are the three levels that we've seen.
Okay, so I guess my question would be, that's been a very big improvement. Is there a way to get to zero? And is there a grading way? Could you put a 10-foot basement in or a crawl space? Or to me,
No.
is there any creative way for us to get to net zero?
Basements and crawl spaces run into our obligation not to let people put people in property in harm's way in a flood zone.
We have to make sure that any water that gets into, we can't drop the crawl spaces any deeper because we have to make sure that any water that gets into the crawl space can drain out. The foundation's designed specifically with flood doors and floodgates to allow water to go in and out. Unfortunately, that's one of the reasons. The reason that we were able to drop as much in the fill is our initial application was one thing. We had to make concessions and redesign the foundation. And what that did is then we were able to reduce some of the fill in the back of the building. If you look at that last application compared to the application that we have in front of you guys today, we removed the whole car from the garage. We shifted everything with the site. We really, we tried to hear what the board was saying and what your goal was. And we knew your goal was the zero net fill, but we did everything we could in order to get as low as we can and still have a septic system that's going to be a viable septic system, because we still, that's kind of how we feel we have to proceed.
I'm hearing that you're not getting to zero unless you manage to get a sewer instead of a septic done here, and then that problem goes away.
What about,
Although I just want to point out that we really have heard that before at 1100s, you know, so I don't know, maybe it would be helpful to just say, yeah, we could get to 0 and we don't want to, or just some way that we can really understand, you know, where the threshold is crossed. That's probably my point.
what about if we eliminate the garage?
The garage is not driving the fill. What's driving the fill is we have a septic system. That's what's driving the fill. In order to construct a septic system that complies with Westchester County Department of Health regulations, 3.5 feet of fill needs to be brought in to separate the bottom of the absorption fields with the top of rock.
Mr. Joffrey? Mr. Joffrey?
Yes.
In your November 4th cover letter to the revised plans, there's a reference to a February 11, 2019 letter from the neighbors. I can't find that on Novus. Was that uploaded or was that something just given to the engineer, the village engineer?
I don't know if it was provided. So you're referring to the information that was related to the sewer. I believe that was given to the engineer and to Ms. Mason, to Mr. Hildebrand and to Ms. Mason.
Yeah. Is there any way we can get a copy of that February 11, 2019? Can you upload that to Novus so we can see that?
We can certainly provide that too.
Okay. And Leslie, Brian, can you take a hard look at the sewer situation out on Grecian Point Road and put together some kind of memo or report?
You're talking about the existing, the condition of it now? Or
Yeah.
We haven't even shared Brian's because it's dated today, but Brian produced a very short, not very short, produced a short memorandum about the viability of sewer options, which we should load up for next time and make sure the applicant has so they could see it.
Mr. Chair, just so that you are aware, that was uploaded into Novus today when we received it, when planning staff received it.
Great, thank you. As was, I saw the DEC tidal wetlands permit. I knew you had that coming in. Thank you.
Was Brian's correspondence on this whole sewer issue uploaded to on Novus?
William just said Brian's was uploaded to Novus today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we've made as much progress on this as we're going to tonight.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify one thing, I believe the Keller Sessions memo that was updated were with respect to the engineering comments to the plan, not the memo that you're referring to as it relates to the sewer.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll make sure that the memo concerning sewer options goes to the applicant, and we'll have it uploaded so the public can see it for next time.
Chairman, one more tidbit and then I'll leave you alone. So before I looked up some alternate sewer septic systems, and there's some innovative stuff out there, you know, no fill systems, etc. So could we ask the applicant to look into?
Tony, we've looked at those. None of those are acceptable to Westchester County Department of Health.
I can back that up.
Could we ask for a variance on that?
There's no such thing.
No.
Okay.
No. We had that with another application, Tony, a while back.
Well, we can't tell the county what to do, at least in most circumstances. Okay.
I'd like the county to sewer a lot of places that have septic, but go ahead.
I agree with you. So one might reasonably say it's one of the most important movements forward in civilization, being able to move the human waste away from the humans. Okay, I think we've gotten as far forward as we're going to on this application, Mr. Joffrey. We've had a pretty good conversation, and I think we both have further homework to do, and I think we understand the issues that we're talking about a lot better than we did when we started. I look forward to seeing you again.
We certainly appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I know that there are some action items that we need to get. I do wish Mr. Hildebrand well. I understand that he's going to be leaving his position. I would just ask if he knows who's going to be taking his place so that we, to the extent we have any questions in the interim and being able to respond, who we coordinate from his office.
Yeah, going either Joe Tremelli and then Esteban Garcia, who's
We certainly appreciate that. I think it's going to be important for us to keep the dialogue open so that we can move this application along. As I'm sure you can appreciate, we've been at this for a very long time. Certainly that timeline that you saw is a very long timeline for all of us here, and it's certainly longer for the applicants. So we're trying to get to a point where hopefully we can get to a determination of consistency much sooner rather than later. We're hopeful that we can maybe do that at the next meeting. So we're going to try to do everything in our power to make sure that we can be as responsive as we can.
Provide complete information and it's a go.
Thank you, Mr. Joffrey. All right, I think we're.
Best wishes for a happy Thanksgiving. I hope you all stay safe and well.
And you as well.
You too.
Ditto. Thank you very much.
Well, I think it's comfort break time. So we'll go back
Thank
on
you.
at 5. Lightning round this a little bit. I think we've set out on a mission to keep ourselves from ever doing the midnight run again. So, and having work sessions has helped a lot. Separate work sessions has helped a lot. We are still getting late and we still have a lot of things. So let's take the minutes first. Our July meeting minutes have been circulated. I've had a chance to look at them. Has everybody who wanted to look at minutes had the opportunity to do so? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Yes.
Second, all in
Motion.
favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
None opposed. Okay, minutes carry. We've been presented with a calendar for the remainder of 2020 and 2021. Has everybody had an opportunity to review that? Okay. I'm
Say
gonna
that
move it.
again, please.
We were presented with a calendar of work session and meeting dates
Okay.
through the end of 2021. Doreen, it's not of much concern to you as you're rotating off.
Right.
So you can vote for it or you can recuse yourself. I don't care. For
Right,
the rest
that's-
of us who will
yeah.
have to do, for the rest of us who will have to do these meetings.
That's exactly why I asked Thomas.
Yeah. I'm going to move that we approve the calendar as presented. If anybody wants to amend, say it now.
I mean, I'll just point out there's two meetings in the last 2 weeks of August and into Labor Day, but I'm fine with it. So I think we just approve it and deal with it later.
We
Okay.
can do that. Yeah, I'm just going to move it. Seamus, you're seconding? All in
Second.
favor?
Yep.
All in favor,
Aye.
calendar as presented?
Aye.
It's not, but did I see, we've
Oh,
got
sorry, my
Tony.
mic was off. Aye.
Tony, Martin, I think I saw David's hand. Yes, okay. Motion carries. Any opposed? No. Okay, that's the calendar off. We have LWRP. What we said we wanted to do this time is divide up the projects still to be done. And we're looking to planning to be able to walk through that with us. William?
Can I share my screen perhaps?
Oh, yes. That'd probably be helpful.
And William, not to jump in ahead of you here. I'm happy to hear your thoughts, but I did go through the, let's see, am I sharing here? Let's see. Okay. So I just went through the red line and kind of pulled out, there's a number of comments in there, and probably we need a team or group of people. I think we need a process to go through and kind of confirm things that are currently redlined, and probably give it a fresh read too, since some time has passed. But I did go through, as we talked about in our work session, and just identify, there's really only, 10 of them or so, things that are currently open. They're not, commented or marked. They're just incomplete. Probably the biggest one is some maps that we need. But maybe I'll just leave this up, see what William's thoughts were. What, personally, what I'd love to see is us to come up with kind of an actionable plan of at least some things that we can complete by the next meeting, and a path to ultimately get this in shape that we can recommend the update.
Seamus, can I add to the maps that one area that you're talking about? The difficulty that we had was that our former planner didn't include the maps to the Department of State and could not reproduce the current maps, the natural resources inventory. I have that listed in my correspondence to you from over 2 years ago. All the various maps that are important that need to be part of our LWRP. So the suggestion back in 14 or 15 was to take the existing maps in our LWRP, and they're all by page numbers if you want me to go through them, and just utilize those, because it was difficult to represent things, from GIS. But at that point, there wasn't the GIS gateway of information. Do you want me to go through the page number of the maps in our current LWRP?
Well, if I can step in, and let you all hear what I think, and then we can take it from there about how figuring out what the next move is. So let me share my screen. Go back. All right, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, so what staff did was we went through we read the LWRP. We also spoke to New York State. The person that my contact at New York State is, he is the director for the LWRP program within the region. Be that as it may, talk to him and ask him, from the state standpoint, what's needed in order to take this LWRP to completion. And he laid out a few things, but there are also some things that planning staff, as we read through it, we began to see and notice that I think it needs to, that would make the plan better and bring it to fruition. So what you see are a list of 7 things that may have some steps in between, but 7 basic things that we see in terms of actionable steps. One would be to align the topics of the LWRP table of contents to reflect New York State state standards. One thing that the Department of State said was that they have some standards. Since this LWRP was created in 1984, since then, they have been creating standards for any communities that come in now to follow. And so with that being the case, they've created a set of standards that we want to make sure that we are touching and at least attempting to align ourselves with this LWRP. These are some basic things like this, putting topic headings, within the various sections, because right now when you read it, it doesn't, the way it came across was like you'd be reading about a paragraph about one topic and then it would jump to another topic. I think that would help. I'll come back to the inventory analysis. The other thing staff would like to do is, like I said, we read it, but we want to go back and we need to really get into it to make sure that we have an understanding of it. So it's to make sure, to provide you with an assessment as to whether or not the 44 policies of our LWRP actually match or align as closely as possible with the 13 Long Island Sound Coastal Management Program policies. So New York State, what they told me is that they have created, it's called the Long Island Sound Coastal Management Program policies. It's 13 policies, very similar to the 44 policies, but there are some differences. And we, as staff, want to make sure that what we're putting out there aligns or can try to meet them as much as possible. To see where there's alignment, come back to you with an evaluation, and then you can make an assessment of how you want to move forward.
Mr. Long, can
yes.
I interject that?
Please.
I will say I can provide the commission with 2 memos if I still have them, or maybe our former chair. That was already done. I provided Mr. Jamie Ethier with a site that says that we can continue to have our 44 policies, that we don't have to adopt the 13 Long Island Sound format, 13 Long Island Sound Coastal Management Program policies, because we have an established LWRP. And that was actually done already. I don't know in whose hands that paperwork is in.
No, I agree with that. He told me that. He said you do not have to use the 13 policies, because we do have the 44 policies. But again, I don't know if, again, you're telling me now, and I didn't know this, that there has been an evaluation. So if you have the paperwork that shows the analysis and the conclusion from that analysis, staff would love to have it. It can only make it better.
I don't know if I still have it, but our former chair may. I'm not sure. But an analysis was done on that back in 2015 when we did this work.
Fair enough. The other thing that's happening in terms of the LWRP, or the proposed update to the LWRP, is FEMA is in the process of updating its flood maps. And I would think that you would want to make sure that your LWRP is somewhat aligned to where they're going with their flood insurance maps. So that's something else that we'd be looking into. We would also look into sort of what you were mentioning about the maps, which actually redrawing the maps. We have the capability to do so. I definitely think the maps need to be redrawn, at least from a user-friendly standpoint, because when you look at the maps now, certain things are not labeled, and I'll use this as a very basic assessment. If you look at the map shows the outline of the village of Mamaroneck, but it doesn't say village of Mamaroneck. It doesn't tell you that the town of Harrison and show, its actual location. So a person picking up the LWRP and looks at a map wouldn't know what the surrounding towns are, would not get a sense of the village's location. So that's something else the staff is looking into. Obviously,
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Look at page 12 of our LWRP. It clearly says there's Harrison. This is a map that's going to be hard to reproduce. High water table.
I have the ability to reproduce it.
Oh, good. Yeah. Because is it going to be easy to do the areas of high water table and shallow soils?
Well, all of that stuff I have to get into, but I mean, I can reproduce, most of the maps or whatever. We just have to, I have to get into finding the information, but I'm in the process of doing so. But I mean, like, If you look at figure 1, you look at figure 1, you just see the outline of the village of Mamaroneck. It doesn't even have the Long Island Sound label. So again, little things like that, so.
What I'm talking about is what is in our existing LWRP, the one that we currently use.
Oh, the one from 1984.
Yes.
Oh, well, that one is.
This is exactly what we need in our new LWRP. In the amended version, Because if these maps that are in our current LWRP are not in our update, then it won't be approved.
Agreed.
I'm not saying these exact maps, but development considerations, natural resource inventory maps. You know, it's great to have areas of steep slopes, but that's only part of a development consideration. On page 12 of our current LWRP, there are areas of high water table and shallow soil, areas of critical erosion. It shows all the freshwater wetlands. You know, it shows a lot of different things that's very hard to read unless you put it on a computer and blow it up. On paper, it's difficult to see.
Agreed. The other thing we want to do is, you know, not necessarily changing the content, because I know a lot of work has gone into that, but I think staff wants to take a look at the actual layout to see if there are other LWRPs that are laid out slightly different to make it more, to make things as user-friendly as possible. You know, that's just with layout. And then the last thing that I think that staff would like to do and come back to you next month, because it's going to take us, you know, it's going to take us about a month to kind of conduct some of this analysis. Come back to you next month with an actual outline or a timeline of how we get you to a point of, you know, ready for adoption or your recommendation to the Village Board of Trustees. So if you'd allow us to do that, but I want to go back to the inventory and analysis. 1 second. Back to that. When I was talking to Mr. Ethier with New York State, he said that, again, when the Village of Mamaroneck created its comprehensive, its local waterfront revitalization plan in 1984, we were the first ones to go through it. There weren't any standards necessarily for how to do it. Over the years, they've been acquiring standards and they've been creating checklists and so forth. And that's what this is. It's an inventory and analysis. And one of the things that I noticed is that the draft does a good job of providing some inventory. It doesn't necessarily get into the analysis of what that means. So, all right, like you said, you know, you have steep slopes. Well, what does that mean in terms of the village and so forth, and moving forward in terms of growth, development, preservation, and so forth? So this checklist, and it's pretty lengthy, kind of gives you some things that should actually go into the inventory and analysis. And these are the type of things that staff wants to be able to put in if they make sense for us and so forth. So that's where we are. Any questions, any thoughts? Is staff on the right page? I mean, you know, are we moving in the right direction?
I like what I see, finally. Finally, they gave us, I would say this, working closely within the coastal management program, there is technical assistance that the Department of State has to provide to a community in the form of legal and technical assistance, both scores. When our LWRP grant was done, we were supposed to make some steps and strides to have the Department of State check along the way. Is there anyone that's going to be responsible at the Department of State to sort of guide this commission to do that? Because to do all this work, to come to find out that, oh, we should have done it this way or that way, you know, at a stopping point with inventory, for example, we do the checklist, and then what do we do with it? How is that, how do we come up with how to add that to the LWRP policies, to implementation techniques? There's 5 sections of our LWRP, and they're all equally important. So inventory and analysis plays a role with everything in the LWRP, even the historical, what we have in our LWRP now, because things haven't really changed. You know, the land and waters really haven't changed. We've made some mistakes, and we have to admit our mistakes and correct them. That's what the coastal management program is all about.
So Seamus had started a list of things that were actionable, that were open items, and I really wanted to sort of see that. There, William, the answer to your questions, several of those things are clearly actionable stuff. You know, assessing the layout, aligning the topic headings, stuff like that. Staff can look through and give a recommendation in a fairly short, you know, timeline about you know, subheadings that can be added for reading clarity, paragraphs that can be moved, you know, that stuff we ought to be able to have some recommendations next meeting. And that's great. The checking the checklists to see if there's stuff that we should add or change is biting off a little more. But certainly the stuff that's like, you know, for reader usability, you know, adding updated maps, adding subheadings, making them more explanatory, moving paragraphs to align the layout with reader usability. That's great, and we can consider those as soon as staff has a recommendation. But Seamus had a list of, I think, open items, and I really wanted to see that.
Yeah, let me put it back up because I'm thinking we could do this in parallel because, you know, William, I thought your suggestions were great, thorough. You know, thanks for doing all that legwork, all stuff that can be improved. I think what maybe we could do, and this is just an idea, thinking out loud here, is maybe we let William and Amber do what they suggested, which is take their list, come up with a timeline for all of that, and present it to us at our next working session meeting, which is, I think, the next time we meet. And then what we could perhaps do in parallel is maybe we create a small working group of commissioners, which I'd be happy to be on. And, you know, maybe it could be 2 or 3 of us or fewer. But I think we could really try to resolve these 10 or so points by the next meeting, because some of them are just, here's an example. I think we need to ask Kyle from down at the Marine Education Center, I believe is what this one is, for some lists that she helped compile. So that's just someone calls her and asks for the list, and then we either know that we have them or we don't. And then there's...
There for a second? Got budget?
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter Linderoth, who works at Save the Sound with me, also serves down there at the Marine Education Center. We could get that information for us as well.
Great. Awesome. And that's up to like...
So I can take that one. If you want me to, I can take that one right there.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
If I may, you know, I'll say this. I want to make a distinction, really, you know, and I understand everybody, you know, everybody's done a lot of work into this, but staff does have a job and staff does have a function. And rather than you as commissioners having to make phone calls like that, that is something that I think staff should do. So if there's any task in here that you think that staff can take on, please give staff the ability to do it. And the reason I say that is because as commissioners, as volunteers, you know, this is what we are paid to do this. So allow us to do it.
So what do
Thank you, William.
Maps are the hardest thing for us to work with, and the thing that staff is best positioned to help us with.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to be efficient on resources, and William, that's certainly very appreciated from my perspective. You know, we all have other things to do for sure. But what I guess what I was thinking was, we have a red line version of the LWRP with a bunch of comments that we could basically agree with most of the comments. Probably, maybe at some point, you know, we all just read it and highlight any comment we don't agree with. And then if we resolve these 7 points, then we have a version of the LWRP that's sort of buttoned up that then I think everything, William, that you mentioned, you could then apply to, whether that's putting in a table of contents, adding in maps, potentially reworking sections. I'm trying to just clear away the brush as much as possible. So maybe taking, your suggestion, maybe what we do is offline, me and Martin, and if anyone, I don't know how many people we can have, but maybe we just have a very quick dialogue of why don't we ask staff to complete these tasks? Why don't we see if there's anything here that requires input that we need to just collect so that we can discuss it as commissioners at the next meeting? And then perhaps there's some open items that we can just say, for example, on like the wetland law, we could just say, this is actually needs to be revisited or doesn't, and just makes progress on the clearly open items from the LWRP by our next meeting.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I do have one question for all of you, or William, actually. The volunteer observation list, do you have the list of wildlife species that an individual did for us in 20, whatever it was, whenever we submitted this to the Board of Trustees? Was that included in the information?
The list of species, I thought I saw something along those lines. But then again, like I said, I got to go back and revisit it again, because today actually what I was doing was looking at that, and then also at the same time I was looking at the appendix from the 1984 LWRP. So
No. I'm talking.
but I have to
I'm
look.
talking about what we submitted to the Department of State, and I just wanted to, since I'm going off the commission, the subject of the public trust doctrine. I personally got in touch with the people at OGS, and I have on a yearly basis to everyone on our commission, as well as the Board of Trustees, forwarded those emails at every year when we had new commissioners and new members of the Board of Trustees. William, do you have that email with the OGS information, the update? Because the law has changed since our LWRP and our underwater land study. I'm not sure if I sent it to you or not.
I know I saw the OGS. I have to go back, like I said, still researching and so forth. So I have to read into it and so forth. But if you want to send it again to make sure we have it, staff is more than welcome to take it.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
It's a forward.
And Doreen, we'll probably be asking you, I'm sure probably beyond the tenure of your time on this commission, for info like that, perhaps as this process goes on, I would imagine. But yeah, what I was envisioning for these couple, public trust doctrine, conflicts, underwater lands, not all of which I would confess to being real sure what it means, would be just by the next meeting have resolved what is needed and whether we have it or not. So Doreen, maybe that's something I can ask you about offline and just collect documents to provide to William.
I don't know that I can answer it, but Ralph Hill's a good person at OGS to get in touch with.
Mm-hmm.
So Seamus, I'm happy to be on whatever you need help with. So just let me know.
Okay. Yeah, I do think it's something that just is going to take a little time, a little research, and a little coordination. And I don't know how much more we can do now, but I do think that if Martin and I take a stab at closing this list off, and William creates a timeline and continues to research, that by the next meeting we can have closed a few doors and have a real clear path, which I think we haven't really had time to get sorted out for some time now. So that's really all that I had on thoughts on this topic.
So Seamus, do you think it would be helpful? Well, your one on here is maps are needed. So could we scratch that one out, since we already know that that's going to be something that the village planner is going to?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess the way I think about it is we're not closing it as an issue. So I'd probably leave it on here, and maybe what I'll do is turn this into more of a table. And the action or responsible party for that will just be staff, because we're to Thomas's point. I mean, we're not going to be able to do that. We can just make sure that someone is aware that it's an open item, And then to Doreen's points, continue to track which maps are being updated and whether they're are being appropriately done based on all the info that's in our 1984 LWRP.
Right. So just so I'm understanding also, William, where you're coming from, because I definitely appreciate the staff time offer to help fill these gaps. Is it sounds to me like you'd like us to be more of a contributor and a reviewer role rather than the block and tackle part of the assembly process. So tell me if I'm reading that wrong, because it sounded to me the way you were describing it, that you would be coming back, you would be doing a thorough review over the next month with your staff, and then coming back to us with basically a plan on how to get this thing over the finish line. And, sort of what Seamus is talking about too, where you would identify the missing pieces, and then we would assign people to those pieces. So the reason I'm asking this, Seamus, is because I don't want us tripping over each other. So if it's something that William is thinking that his staff is going to plow ahead and identify all the missing pieces.
Yeah, I didn't see, other than the table of contents, I didn't see too much overlap with William's list in this, I don't think, because I think his is a little more processed, and this is very specific to open comments in the current red line. I absolutely agree that the last thing we want is any sort of version control issues where people are making actual edits in one document at the same time as people are making one in another. But I don't envision that happening, because I don't envision making any edits between now and our next meeting. I envision collecting information where it's needed, or if there's a comment that's like, is this consistent? This one's an example. It kind of says that LWRP consistency has to be resolved within 30 days of X trigger point, which I think the comment in the current red line is that's not true anymore. So it would just be finding what the replacement fact is and being prepared to drop it in. So William, you might have something to add to that, because that question was really directed at you, but I just wanted to confirm. I don't anticipate making any, actual version edits in a form of the file probably until we meet again.
Fair enough. I agree with Commissioner Hayden was saying was huh? Sorry?
You can call me Martin.
Oh, all right. What Martin was saying, from the standpoint that usually the way it works when boards have staff, commissions have staff, is staff does the heavy lifting, and it is the commission that says, yes, you're on the right path, no, you're not on the right path, this is what you need to do, and so forth. And it's staff's job to then go back to the drawing board, make it work, come back to you and make sure we're on the right path. And that's how we get to the finish line. And so again, this one is going to be more of a hybrid, because you've already started the work. You put the ball in the air, and so now it's staff trying to come along and catch the ball and keep you moving. So, so any work that you contribute absolutely is appreciated, but that's typically how it works. So.
Right. And I get that. And that I think you both addressed what my concern was, is that, the ball is in the air at the moment, and we have sort of been passing it down the lane, and we just want to make sure that, come next meeting, I'll tell you where my reservations lie is looking at that large checklist that we were going through, that you were going through. It seems like there may be a lot of missing stuff that could be identified through going through that checklist. And I anticipate that there may be a lot of large gaps for us to fill. So.
Fair enough, but I think where we are at this stage in the game is for staff to go through, figure out what makes sense, come back to you and say, do you want this? Do you really need this? Because it's really your timeline.
Right.
The more stuff you add, the longer it's going to take to reach the finish line. So it's really up to you how you want to do it. Our job is to come to you and say, do you want this? Do you think we should put that in? This kind of a thing. So that's where we are.
Right. But with that checklist, is that is that a prerequisite to its approval? Like, does it need to meet so many checks in that checklist to be considered viable?
When I was talking to the Department of State, he didn't say that. He said these are the type of things that they would like to see. More, the biggest thing that he said, more so than the topics, was making sure that we actually have the analysis. So
Right.
anything that we put in as it relates to the inventory, that we make sure we have the analysis to explain what does that actually mean for moving forward in terms of the growth of the village, in terms of the preservation of the, for lack of a better term, the waterfront, but not just the waterfront, but the preservation of coastal resources.
Yeah.
And that's the key. So again, you know, it's letting staff come back to you with a timeline that you can tell us, all right, that's too long, that's too short, whatever, and we can then work it out.
All right, thank you. I didn't mean to drag this out, but thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate it.
All right, so I think we've got a plan to move forward. Thank you, Seamus and William, for thinking about how to get this done and advance the ball. Our next agenda item is the proposed 50-foot setback law. We've got to get comments back, and I felt when I sat down to write up a letter to share, I wasn't sure that my notes and recollection allowed me to fully express what it was we talked about. So I want to revisit this one more time and make sure that I write this up in a way that reflects all of our view. I think we were mostly focused on section 6B and the standards for and authority to give variances to the 50-foot setback. It's focused on the neighborhood as a unit of analysis, the zoning board of appeals being the granting organization, and the lack of appropriate alignment with our concern for floodplains and erosion and environmental quality. That's where my focus was. But what else do we need to say about this in order to guide the Board of Trustees about what they have to look out for us for when we make a consistency determination?
Chairman Byrd, aren't we making a consistency determination tonight since we have the CAF and the information?
Well, I guess that's a question for Christie. Do we have to vote it, or do we have to give them feedback as part of a consistency review and then vote it at another time?
Actually, the way we give feedback is through our consistency determination, because there's nothing in the law that allows us to give feedback on laws to the Board of Trustees. It's through consistency.
Okay, except that for practical purposes, we can send them a memo and tell them what we think. So, but I know Christie is on it. I wanted to.
I just want to look at one thing very quickly. Well, you already voted it not consistent, so if they wanted,
right, so we bought ourselves time.
Right, so if they wanted, they could just move forward with your vote of not consistent. But obviously, you would like to make a determination based on the actual law itself. So there is a possibility, I think, that in the past you've done advisory consistency. Possibly, I'm not entirely sure if that's something where you're not giving a final determination, but it's sort of an advisory. But give me one moment, hold on.
Yeah, as far as I know, advisory consistency is not something we've done as an interim step. Advisory consistency is when we don't actually do consistency.
Oh, I see. Okay, then I'm using the terminology wrong. My apologies. I just want to look very quickly at your consistency, so give me 1 minute. Thank you, Doreen. I can never find it.
And the Board of Trustees can't move forward until they get their advisory consistency determination from us. They're the only agency that we do advisory consistency determinations for.
Right, but you already determined it to be not consistent. So what I was trying to say is that if they wanted, they could move forward with your not consistent. I don't know just off the top of my head whether you can just provide them comments or you would have to move forward with consistency. You know, I don't see anything wrong with writing them a letter and explaining that you need more time and that you would appreciate it if they keep the public hearing open until the December meeting. I don't see an issue with that.
Yeah, or on the alternative, having already voted it not consistent for incomplete information, we can just follow with a memorandum explaining that we believe there are other problems with it.
Yeah, you just want to make sure that they wouldn't close the public hearing on the 23rd without.
I may be unclear on the process. Tell me if I have this right. So we voted inconsistent based on a lack of information that I think has now been supplied the CF. Is that right? So now we're sitting with basically the requested or requested via inconsistency information. Is that right? Okay.
That's where we are.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, interested to hear others' thoughts because I think others on this commission have a little better process background than I do. But
if we don't do consistency determination tonight, we've timed out. Again, it'll be 30 days.
And I think from my perspective, I think we now have the information to do so. But I'm just waiting to hear. It'd be helpful to have a dialogue among us, perhaps.
Yeah. That may be right. It may be the prudent thing to do is just discuss it, vote it, and be done with it. Then our input is both in and embodied in a vote. Nobody can question the procedure.
And I have to say that I do agree with Doreen about that 30 days because I just looked at it quickly and they did give you the extension till the 23rd. So then you're going to
Okay. Well, then we should vote it tonight. So just so everybody is clear, my focus on this is really that I don't believe they have appropriately vested the authority in the right board in section 6B. And I don't think that they've got the right unit of analysis by focusing on changes to neighborhoods rather than areas. I think it misidentifies the unit of analysis. And I think that 6B as drafted does not encompass the concerns that we serve around floodplain safety and erosion in the way that we would do or that planning would do. So those are my thoughts and the reasons that I believe this statute as this piece of code as proposed is not consistent with our policies.
Thomas, can I add to that, Thomas? But I think we need to go through the policies and see how this law, is consistent or not. But I want to draw everybody's attention to the section 10 of the law, where it's documented in 342-89. That statement says that the ZBA will have exclusive jurisdiction on all matters prescribed by 7712, which is under New York State law, or Chapter 240 of the Village Code. There's another section in there. So essentially, the way this law is written, it delegates authority over all matters, all exclusive jurisdiction of Chapter 240 in the code, which is what we do. So I don't know if that was the intent of the law. If it is, then it ameliorates the Harbor Coast Zone Management Commission, but it gives the Zoning Board of Appeals the authority over everything in Chapter 240. In other words, consistency, marine structures permits, just by how this law was written. I don't know if everybody sees it that way, but it's pretty clear. The other thing is in Chapter 342, zoning 34250, number 5, the information that's supposed to be, or proposed to be stricken out literally implements our public access policies and our water dependent uses policies in 1, 2, 4, 6, 9, 10, 19, 20, 22. And what is the LWRP's public access plan? It's not only for the marine zone, but it's also for the public, the people of the state of New York, to have access to the water.
Doreen, what version are you looking at?
I'm looking at what was posted to our agenda.
Yeah, because I'm looking at what's posted to our agenda, and for some reason, it's the version from February. It's version 3. We're on version 6.
Okay, but there were separate documents, the red line doc.
That's really not helpful.
That's fine. I just want everyone to know that, because you're not, what's posted online is not the actual version that should be discussed. And
Oh, boy.
Oh, man.
Because we all took the time to really look at this, and we're looking at versions.
I don't think it's changed extensively from version 3. I can't guarantee. I think that might have been the one actually that I did the red line for. But all I'm saying is that what's posted online and what you're discussing is not the version that's been referred to you by the Board of Trustees.
Well, Chrissy, let me ask you. Let me ask you this: Does version 6 still give most of the authority to the ZBA?
Yeah, like I said, the content of it is similar, but I just would think that you should be discussing the one that was referred to by the Board of Trustees.
Well, if it's substantially similar, I'm ready to vote on it.
Yeah, probably. Just to clarify, my concern, because Doreen said that we ought to be clear which policies we're talking about. I think that the paragraph I referenced is inconsistent with our policies 7A 44 and the watershed policies in 11, 12, and 17.
But also policies 1, 2, 4, 6, 9, 10, 19, 20, 22, because it allows development other than water dependent development where it should not happen. This law defines tidal wetlands. Essentially what this law is doing is it's not promoting. If you look at policies 1, 2, and 4, the primary goal and the primary reason of why this community developed an LWRP was to prevent development other than water-dependent uses at the water. So this law, in essence, allows for development or redevelopment along the water that is not water-dependent use.
Right.
So
Those are great points.
Yeah.
Great points.
That's a good
Doreen.
point. Other than what we've talked about, mostly me and Doreen, does anybody want to put on the record the concerns that they've got or reasons they've got for taking the vote?
there are also floodplain issues too,
Yeah, right. I said,
the flood policies too.
right.
All
I
right,
said that.
let's vote. Let's
Okay.
take a vote.
Just one more time, I apologize. I understand what you want to do, but just keep in mind that you are voting on something that you don't actually have the draft before you board. And I understand it's substantially the same. It's your decision, but I'm just
So-
letting you know that.
To cover
Christy,
our
didn't you
butts, William, do you have
Didn't
the,
you
do
send
you
us
have the,
version?
I'm looking, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, I'm looking now to see what what Sally emailed, because from when I got it, all I did was take it and that's what I put into Novus. So if there was
So I
another
sent you
version-
the clean versions, William. I think I had sent it over to you, But the last communication on it may have been this red line. I don't know how. Look,
Christy, can you kick out the current to every commissioner? Because we can all open our email and just look at it now. So we can take a vote on the.
Well,
the
Christy, is your point? We have it. It's the version 5 to version 6 red line that you sent us.
Yeah, so the version 6 is the most recent version. I think I sent you another red line as well. That was version 4 to 6 possibly.
But you sent that to us in the email. This is just the additional information for certain sections that aren't different that I pulled off. If you look at our agenda, there are certain sections, and that's what I was referencing to with Chapter 342 zoning, 34050 number 5. It's totally stricken out. That was my point. It's totally stricken out in version 6 too.
It's not so much about what you were saying, Doreen. It's more that it caused me to go look at the agenda online and click at what you had on the agenda and note that you're not reviewing the correct version. That's all. If you are being referred a local law by the Board of Trustees, you want to refer the law that's been referred to you, not an earlier version of the law. There's been changes. Again, I don't know if it's substantive, but
just just to make sure that we're procedurally proper, I just want to make sure that we've got the current version in front of us.
I'm going to send
we
it.
all vote.
Which for the record, we have and have had since November 10th via a red line, but the red line clearly, I think, but I mean, the clear line clearly says that 6B is in there in the same form, which is that it's the zoning board of appeals, and the third prong of their ability to grant a permit is adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district.
Yeah, I've now got it in front of me once again. I've got section 6B up in front of me, and everything I said is still true. Okay, so we've all been able to consult the red line of the last version. We all know which law we're looking at, and all the concerns we expressed are still what they were when we talked about it just a minute ago. Time to call for a vote. Is there anybody that doesn't think they have enough information to vote on consistency on this law? Okay, I think we do. I'm going to call myself first. I vote that it is not consistent. Seamus?
I also vote that. Will we come up with a list of policies that are why? I think we've listed them on the fly here.
I think we've done them on the fly, but they'll appear on the minutes, and I'm pretty sure Christy and William have good notes on which policies we specified. Andrew?
Yep.
Inconsistent. Or not consistent.
Martin?
Not consistent.
Doreen?
Not consistent, and please make sure you add the flooding policies of 12 through and
11,
erosion.
11, 12, 17, absolutely. David?
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Oh, I'm not consistent. I'm sorry. No wonder I've been trying to talk and haven't gotten it. Serious.
No, we're just ignoring you, David.
I'm thinking I'm being rude. Okay. Okay.
All right, that's 7, and we have a unanimously not consistent. That should send a pretty clear message. Okay.
Can we also give the Board of Trustees a little guidance on how this law subverts the mission of our LWRP and our water-dependent uses at the coast and the riverine areas, and let them know that if they choose to have to do something with the law, that they can do a zoning overlay district or some other type of method, deal with it in the planning code or planning board codes with planning board or zoning board. But when they deal with Chapter 2.4 or the wetlands law, it also is in conflict with the Article 42 of Executive Law in New York State, Environmental Conservation Law. It conflicts with many, many laws. Our speedies permit, our illicit discharge and detection. I mean, it just allows development where it shouldn't. And I don't know where they came up with a 50-foot buffer, but that's where the conflict is.
Okay, and now that you said it, it's part of the record.
Thank you.
Chair, I just want to confirm, will you and William be working together to send that communication to the BOT?
Yeah, I will. I think I can adequately sum up. If to the extent William can't do it from notes, I can help in filling that in. William, we can take this offline tomorrow.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we've gotten through the minutes, the schedule, LWRP, the setback. The wetlands ordinance is another thing that just is taking time that I end up not having, in part because we had a whole lot of work to do in preparation for the applicant items today. I'm just going to have to punt that. I'm sorry. I've been the leading advocate of let's just get the wetlands ordinance done, and now I'm the reason it's delayed. I'm sorry.
I sent really good, I just want to say something, Thomas. I sent a really good example of Carmel's wetlands law. I'm off the commission as of after this evening, but I will tell you something. That law is in compliance with, well, just for freshwater wetlands, in compliance with what the Watershed Advisory Committee 4 made recommendations for in 2004, which is what made us do an LWRP update, and we still haven't accomplished that. So it's worth having a look at that law because there's no stone unturned.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Proposed tree ordinance. I got more extensive comments from David, which I appreciate. And so we've got multiple versions of draft. I'm going to synthesize those into one. We've got a little more time on that one because the Board of Trustees has slowed their roll on that one for reasons of significant public pushback. I'm going to try to embody all those into one letter that we can all sign off on. Thank you for everybody who gave me comments. And
May I say something as well? I just wanted to say to Mr. Neufeld, I hope you didn't feel that I was trying to squash your comments. I just meant that they would likely have a new version, but I didn't want you to think that I didn't want you to comment.
I was just, no, it's not at all.
Okay, great.
yeah,
And
they've struggled with this one and the public reaction to it. They need all the feedback they can get. I think it's fair to say.
Mhm.
Got calendar dates. That leads us to the Westchester County Outfall Project, and that is near and dear to Andrew's heart. You want to give the update?
Yeah, so there's a proposed letter out there. I guess we should do that.
Well, I don't think that's proposed anymore. Didn't that go?
Well, that was just a draft. I hope it didn't go. Was that sent?
Yeah, we did. You said that the chair signed it. Wasn't that the
Say
letter?
again?
No, I'm sorry. I'm
sorry.
I'm getting mixed up with the bridge.
Yeah,
Getting mixed up with the bridge.
yeah, we both did the same thing. The
Yeah, I
letter
think
that
you're
was
getting confused
signed
with
and
the
went was the bridge letter, was the letter on the bridge saying that we expect that to come back to us for
Right.
consistency on a full plan. I'm sorry. It's been a bit of a week, and that happened very quickly, and we had to respond to it. So my report, I guess, on the road work on the bridge at the Boston Post Road and the entrance to Harbor Island is that we heard that work was going to commence soon, and we contacted the state. We sent them a letter saying, thank you very much for your preliminary review, but you're coming back to us on consistency, right? We heard you've picked your contractor. give us plans and we'll do consistency on it. So that letter is out. We've let them know we expect it to come back to us with a full plan. That's done. I'm sorry, Andrew, you were saying we've got a draft letter.
We have a draft letter to the county on the jetty and the fact that Doreen caught the underwater land easement that was on its way to the Board of Trustees. That was stopped. We have to work on a letter, and we also have to work on a letter to the Board of Trustees. And we also have to, I guess, get the Department of State involved now, because this is not, the proper procedures not being followed.
Andrew, didn't you mention at our work session that you were looking for comments from commissioners and you were going to, add to or whatever on your letter?
Yeah, I want to get a letter out sooner rather than later. I saw your comments adding the letter. I'd like to keep the letter as brief as possible and then get into more substance later. I saw the things that you had added to it. If you want, I sent a Word file that you can edit if you wanted to do something like that. But I didn't want to put that. I just wanted to make it a preliminary letter to let them know our position, and then get into more substantial. More substantial law and more substantial, the things that you sent basically at a later time.
Well, it's important to put it out there on the record so OGS knows, because they've often done easements without having a hearing. And Christy, I have a question. You had mentioned that we were the village. I didn't understand. Maybe you can clarify. Either the village or our commission was granted an extension until November 30th. Who is that from?
So essentially what happened is we reached out to the county prior to, I think it would have been the November 9th meeting of the Board of Trustees, whatever the meeting was a week ago on that Monday, because comments were due by November 16th. And we needed obviously additional time, or we thought the Board of Trustees would like some additional time to respond. So what we did is we reached out to the county and asked the county whether they were comfortable, if we needed additional time to respond, whether they were comfortable with that. And if so, if they could please reach out to the OGS. So I don't know on the OGS's end if they ever responded to them. I know that the county requested that the OGS provided some additional timeline for us to respond.
So can we get something in writing as far as a response is concerned? Because that letter was pretty clear that since we're the adjacent municipality to this work, that our comments were due on the 16th. It might be a moot point by now.
It could be, but as far as, I would have to call the county, see what happened with the OGS. I have not had any contact with the OGS at this point. So like I said, it was something that the county had agreed to take up. So I will have to, I'd have to speak to the county. But November 23rd is the next date that it'll be discussed by the Board of Trustees. So if you do have any comments, regardless of whether we've gotten that letter or not, or if we don't have it in time, we really need to respond to the Board of Trustees at that point, or the commission does, or give their feedback.
So what can we do sooner rather than later to just let the Board of Trustees know that we've got a problem with this? Can we send a letter that I drafted, or do you want to, enhance that a little bit? Is that sufficient? Has anyone read the letter and have any comments on it?
Well, maybe one of us representing the commission can join their meeting on Monday night. Is it on their work session, Christy,
Yeah.
or is it on the
Second item on their work session? Because like I said, let's just say that extension has been granted, because that's how we're operating at this point. Like I said, they need to address it. So it's the second item on their work session so that they can get it done.
Now, it was on the work session before, and then it wasn't even discussed, right?
Was not discussed. No, they have, first of all, their work sessions at this point are like 25 items. I mean, it's absolutely nutty. They're very long and they haven't gotten through a work session in the past, I'd say a couple meetings. And so they're trying to work through them. But, you know, like I said, that's why it's brought up first and foremost. And again, it really, the response to the OGS is, do you feel you'd be adversely affected by this easement? So,
Yes.
right, I understand the commission's response to it. I just, you know, in terms of responding, obviously you should provide as much information as you can, but perhaps even just letting your concerns be known. Maybe that's enough for further conversation. I'm not sure.
Well, it might not be a bad idea for somebody to be on if Andrew could do it, and I'll be available if I can, so that we can answer any questions they have about why we are asking them not to grant the easement.
So to be clear, you want me to participate in the next Board of Trustee work session?
If you're free to do it, that would be ideal, because you're you know, closer to this and passionate about it. But I also understand the issue, and I can do it too. I'll be on if I can, but it's in deference to you know, your motivation on the issue. I let you talk if you don't have a conflict.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the procedure, so I would dial in and introduce myself and let it be known that I'd like to speak on the issue.
Well, you
just tell them you're available to answer questions, because I mean, what I think procedurally, how I see it playing out is we should get them a letter that says we object to the easement, we believe we're aggrieved by it, and then if they want to ask about it at the work session, they should know that you're available, and then they can unmute you.
Why don't you reach out to Sally Roberts, excuse me, Dan Sarnoff. Dan Sarnoff handles the work session. And just let him know that you'll be attending on behalf of HCCM for that item. And that way he can announce.
They get a work session. They have to invite you to speak, but I think they would want to hear what we have to say on it. So.
Okay. And when's the work session?
It starts at 5 p.m., I believe. They may have, I don't think they decided on earlier time. So 5 p.m. it should be it.
5 p.m. what day?
Monday.
23rd, Monday.
Monday the 23rd. Okay, and someone can send me the link for that? Or is that a call-in?
So you can find the link on the village website, but Sally Roberts would be the one that handles the actual distribution.
Okay, I'll call Sally tomorrow.
So the other thing I wanted to point out, because when the village receives communication from OGS, DOS, DEC, okay, sometimes it goes to the village board of trustees, sometimes it goes here, sometimes it goes there. This time, I guess it went to the village clerk. There is a procedure that everybody has to follow, and responses are due by federal and sometimes state law within a certain time period. With DEC, it's 30 days. When they say they want, you know, by copy of this letter, we would appreciate X, Y, and Z, you know. We can't wait. There's no extension. They have uniform procedures and time frames. So I have what I got from Jamie Ethier, and it's part of the Coastal Management Program, the procedures to follow when state agencies are conferring with us, and I really think it's about time to do two things this board can really benefit from, the applicants can, and everybody else. One is making sure applications are complete. Two is getting a procedure and a policy or a law together regarding distribution of information to this commission for its response, like OGS, to, you know, these agencies. Because oftentimes we're the agency that's called on to make these assessments. I'll send that as my final farewell as to the procedural requirements that Jamie sent me when I was coming in 2015, and we still haven't accomplished it.
Okay, it is almost 11 and we're reaching pumpkin time. We are through we're through all the items on the agenda. And I think at this point we can I guess we can probably all agree that we've really appreciated Doreen's comments over the years, her incisive questions, and her breadth of knowledge about state procedures and statutes. Thank you very much. I'll miss you.
Thanks,
It was a
Doreen.
pleasure.
Definitely, Doreen. Yeah, 100% agree.
Doreen, I do have to tell you that I graduated law school in 2015. So you've been on this board as long as I've been practicing law. So that's certainly something to
Ooh, thank you very much for your kind comments. Be coastal champions, carry the torch,
Well, you
and
only
never
have to
give
stay
up.
on for a year before you can come back, so.
Oh, Chairman,
I might, you never know. It might be time for me to fly the coop in New York. I'm not sure about that. It might happen in a coastal community.
Tony?
So Chairman Burt, this is my last meeting also, so I just wanted to say I enjoyed being on the committee and yeah, keep the faith, brothers and sisters.
Tony, you did us great service doing the work of chair for a year. I learned a lot from that, and I really appreciated it. Thank you. You've been terrific to work with, and I'll miss you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Agree. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. And thanks, Doreen. I used to call Doreen before every meeting, right, Doreen?
Oh, yeah. Hey, I learned from the best at New York State. That's all, you know.
You know a lot, that's for sure.
You have to ask questions when you don't understand. That's how I know it.
Well, you're a font of an encyclopedia.
Always.
All right, and with that, I think I'm going to move to adjourn.
One thing which we could do offline. Do we have our next work session scheduled yet? For this year?
Yeah, it's 8 days before your actual meeting, so it is December 8th.
Okay, thank you.
All right, move to adjourn.
Second.
All in
Yeah.
favor?
Bye. Be
Thank
well and have a good Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thanks. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. Good night.
Night.
Done.